that like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. I moved into this old rural house a few weeks ago. It sits alone at the end. Lasted for a long time and wasn't just some one-off sound or seeing something. Move. As you can probably tell, I'm generally a skeptic about these things. And I look for a rational explanation in anything, even though I definitely want to be proven wrong. Now this happened late at night, definitely a few hours after midnight. At least I was having trouble sleeping around this time in my life for one reason or another, but it wasn't uncommon for me to be fully awake in regular intervals throughout the night. I remember that I needed to get up to go to the bathroom, but the whole house was pitch black and everybody was asleep. The door to my room creaks like crazy and is very loud when you shudder to even normally, so to avoid disturbing my family, I was very careful to slowly unlatch it so as to not make any noise. Crack the door slowly, and when I return, make sure the door shut before I release the knob slowly to not make a large click or a sound. I laid back down in bed, still unfortunately wide awake, just trying to make myself tired. Then something weird happened. I heard my door knob slowly turn and unlatch the same way that I had done a couple of minutes before, and the door cracked open about an inch. My bed was only a couple of feet from the door, so I watched it open wide awake. No one was behind the door when it opened, though I half expected my dad to peek in and ask if I was okay since I was still awake, but no, at this point I was getting a little bit spooked. I was sure that I had closed and latched the door since I was so intentional about not making any noise. I laid there for a good while, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, before I reached over and just shut the door, not caring about any noise anymore. It was shut this time for sure as well, and it closed loudly, so I knew. A few minutes later, as I'm trying to fall asleep, I start to hear something else down the hallway. I can hear footsteps coming up the stairs. The cadence was slow, but I could hear each stair. I perked up to listen, and the weirdest thing happened. The steps seemed to start over as I started to pay attention. This happened a couple of times too, where the footsteps would reach almost the top of the stairs and then start over at the bottom. I know that they were starting over since a couple of the stairs at the bottom have a distinctive creaking unlike the upper ones. I was obviously very confused listening to this over and over, and then I tried to lay down and ignore it, but then the steps stopped starting over and over, and this time when they reached the top of the stairs, they came down the hall and stopped just outside of my door. I remember in the dead silence too, I heard the faint sound of feet settling into the carpet. That was when the breathing started too. It was light at first and progressively got heavier and more labored. Deep breaths turned to gasping breaths, which evolved into crackling and raspy inhales, almost like that of a lifelong smoker. It sounded like someone was right outside of my door, and for some reason just standing there breathing. At the time, this felt like it had lasted half an hour at least, when it maybe only lasted a couple of minutes. At this point, I'm laying down stiff as a board, trying to look at anything but the door. My heart was beating out of my chest, and then finally it stopped, but not before whatever was standing out there let out what sounded like a raspy chuckle. You could probably chalk all this up to a lack of sleep and an overactive imagination at the time. I know that, but all I can say is that in now 24 years, I have never had anything similar like this happen to me ever again, and having the same sleep problems regularly since middle school. I still get chills thinking about that night. I wonder if anybody else has had anything similar happen to them, because if you have, then I feel deeply sorry for you. It's something that I wouldn't wish on anyone, and it's a very, very frightening experience to go through, and something that never leaves you. Yesterday, my wife wakes up at about 2:30 in the morning while freaking out. She woke up to our 9-year-old nonverbal son putting his face against hers. Then she went back to sleep later and quickly woke up to a Mexican song all about life being pointless playing and repeat in her head, followed by hearing a voice of "kill yourself" being heard. She was reasonably scared and wakes me up every time that she gets freaked out, so we stayed up a little bit and then went back to sleep together. Later tonight, the following day, I wake up at about the same time, but I get a repeat of Britney Spears' "Hit Me Baby," but only the line of "My loneliness is killing me" for 5 straight minutes playing in my head in an almost outwardly audible fashion. I was a little bit scared at first, but I just tried to go back to sleep and ignore it. But then I heard the little trampoline springs next to me creak loudly as if someone had got onto it. I'm currently sitting alone and scared to sleep when I can usually brush these things off. By the way, I've been sleeping on the couch recently because my kid has also been trying to escape out of the door next to it in the middle of the night. We have bought locks and alarms, but I just still don't feel safe without being there to protect him. I can assure you too that I never listened to Britney Spears, so I was kind of shocked that that song popped into my head. I also woke up extremely hot and sweaty despite it being cold in the living room. As soon as I put on my sweater out of habit, my sweater cooled me to my core instead of heating me up as well, which was really weird. When I experience stuff like this, I usually get angry on purpose and talk out loud against the negative energy that I'm feeling. I do this because that has helped every time in the past. Against falling into fear to weird occurrences like this. Anyway, I can't sleep and I'm having a tough time understanding any of this. My wife last night, when she experienced her situation, kept saying that a demon is here. She and I are both atheists, though, and I tried my best to explain to her that this was all from stress and that she had recently just heard the song in the car that day, so it was all just in her head. She seemed to buy the explanation, so she was able to sleep soon after. Now the same thing has happened to me, but with a song that I haven't heard in ages, and I've woken up with songs playing in my head obviously before like anyone, but they always go through the whole song in a continuous stretch. Having the song only play a single and very disturbing phrase definitely is a little bit weird. Like I said, I don't really believe in this stuff, but it almost seems like I was being mocked, maybe especially because I was out here alone, but I've been fine with it. My loneliness is killing me, as if me being alone would lead to something being able to easily kill me or something. I didn't interpret it as the original lyrics obviously meant. For 1 second I interpreted it as if something was preying on me due to me currently being alone, and well, that's it. I apologize if it's a bit jumbled, but it's due to a lack of sleep, and I would really like your opinions on what this might be. Is it all just in our heads, or is there something more going on? Here I want to preface this with saying that I've hunted and hiked in the region since I was 9 years old. In other words, I am very familiar with the wildlife and the sounds of the forest. To you, I'm not really a believer in any of this sort of thing, but I just don't really have an explanation for what happened tonight. So I hiked about 1.5 miles through forest and swamp hunting deer today, and got to the pocket of woods and a field that I wanted to be in, and climbed a tree to hunt out of. By all accounts, this was an uneventful afternoon and evening until sundown. For about 30 straight minutes I listened to a rabbit be tortured and just wouldn't die. If you'd heard a dog or a hawk get a rabbit or hunted rabbits, then you know what I'm talking about. When they're distressed, they scream bloody murder, and this just seemed to continue forever. Naturally, this can make you on edge, but I figured that a hawk got it and was just killing it. But then the sound of a twig snapping in silence. The rabbit had stopped. Through the thicket I could make out a figure, vaguely deer-shaped, moving through the woods at about 35 yards away. So I grabbed my bow, but the undergrowth is far too thick for me to pick out much more than a rough outline. It walked behind a tree and disappeared. The sun is now fully set, and I'm in like the last 15 minutes of post-sundown light, and that's when I hear in a flat, emotionless child's voice coming from where that deer disappeared, help, over and over again. No fluctuation or distress to the voice, not said as if it was asking for help, but just a statement. Help, help, over and over again. It must have said that probably 15 times, and then the woods went silent. There wasn't even a breeze to make a sound now. Then a crack of a limb off of a tree snapping, and at that all hell broke loose in those woods. Squirrels, birds, and deer suddenly shot out of this wood like bats out of hell, sounding like an absolute stampede through the forest. And then suddenly silence again. To make things worse for me, I lost my hat, clipped light on the walk-in, and had to haul but 1.5 miles through the woods back to my truck in complete darkness, my path only lit up by tonight's full moon. Anyway, I went back to the woods this morning. Last night, after getting back to my truck, I called a few friends to let them know what had happened, and then had a relatively sleepless night to boot. This morning I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I decided that I needed to return. I grabbed my hunting dog, called up a buddy to come with me, and set out back to those woods. First I drove around the property, but nobody was parked at any trailhead, so there shouldn't be anyone around. We took a long way around, heading north to get to the woods, though a few miles from the parking area. Stopped to talk, looked for animal signs, and listened as we go. We approached the woods from the south, keeping on the outside of it all, in a tall, grassy, wet field. As we approached within 200 or so yards of where I had heard it last night, we stopped to talk for a moment and to plan how best to go about entering the woods. This isn't some sort of manicured forest, by the way, that's easy to walk in on. The undergrowth is dense and filled with thorny shrubs and buckthorn, whereas yesterday and in the weeks past this area was teeming with life: deer, pheasants, hundreds of turkeys and their PTS, crows, squirrels, and rabbits. Today the woods here in the fields were completely silent, and as we discussed this, it was then that I realized that my dog was nowhere to be seen or heard. She normally wears a bell, or at least the metal pieces of her collar are sufficient for me to hear where she is, but it is completely silent. She wears an e-collar that I can press a button that will make a beeping noise that I can hear, and I press that button and there's silence. I yelled for her, but there was silence. Then coming from the forest ahead of me, I hear the yelping of my dog in pain, loud and clearly my dog. I look at my friend and take off towards the woods, calling and beeping the collar and calling and beeping again, but it was back to silence. I look at my buddy and he asks, "What are you doing?" as if he hadn't heard it. We stop and wait for a moment on the edge of the woods. I call one more time and finally hear the jingle of her call coming up to me, but completely unharmed and from the opposite direction of where I thought that I'd heard her. Crying confused, we distanced ourselves from the woods again and continued north. Along the edge again we neither heard or saw any wildlife. We found a few spots where things were recently killed, staining the ground with rotted blood, but no signs of anything living. Eventually we turned back, and as we crossed the same spot that I thought that I'd heard my dog, my friend stopped, looked at me in a panic and said, "Oh, your dog," and took off running to the woods. I called after him asking what he was doing, and he said that he'd heard her clearly crying in pain in the woods and was confused when I said that I had heard nothing. It was just the same as when we had first walked by and I was the one who heard it. I could see my dog in the opposite direction smelling around, totally unharmed and not distressed at all. I called to my friend that the dog is fine and was over by me, and at that we decided to rush out. Now, for those that might ask what else may it be, I have heard my dog yelping before, and I can assure you that that was definitely it. It doesn't sound anything like coyotes or wolves or anything like that, and I definitely won't be returning to that area ever again. For about 10 years my family of 5 rented a house that we just never felt was quite right. It was my wife and I and our son and 2 daughters. The house had shared land with a trailer park, and my kids made friends with a lot of the kids in the area. That's important for later as well, but over that time the kids would talk about some things that they'd experienced. They had lots of dreams that took place in the house. Apparently mostly the dreams were frightening as well, but sometimes they were warnings. They said now one morning before heading to school, my oldest told me about the nightmare that he'd had the night before. Then when my middle woke up, she told me about the nightmare that she had the night before. After school I told them both that they had experienced a shared dream because they both had told me the exact same nightmare. Once my youngest had her leg pulled while sleeping but thought that her big sister was just messing with her, until the following morning when she asked her about it. Things in the house would sometimes move or shake, but almost always just on the edge of vision, and we always tried to explain it away as just seeing things. The kids, they would sometimes see a shadow person wearing a tall hat in their periphery, but they also insisted that there was something masquerading as a little girl, but they weren't sure if it was the same entity taking multiple shapes. We bought a house in early 2021, maybe about half an hour away from the old place, and we eventually moved out over the next few weeks. The kids at that time, they were 18, 16, and 14, finally felt safe, and they opened up to my wife and I about all of the things that they had experienced there. There was a lot that they didn't talk about while we lived there, and many more details shared about some of the things that I had mentioned above. It was now all out in the open, and hearing all 3 of them talk about things definitely made me a bit of a believer, but now they were just spooky stories, and all of it was in our past, or so I thought. At least, you see, last night my oldest had a dream they were talking to their sister or middle kid in our current house. They were just chatting, and she told him that she had to get some homework done, so my son said good night and headed to their room. They closed the door and their current room was gone, and they found themselves in their old bedroom and were immediately uneasy as the dream turned into a nightmare. It ended when one of our current cats never lived at that old place, by the way, scared them out of their dream by jumping out of their bedroom closet, which had always been a bit of a hot spot back in the day. He went to the closet door and slammed it shut, and immediately there were 3 hard knocks on the door from the inside. He apparently manifested a lock for the door in the dream, locked it, and woke up. It was just after midnight, and he told me about it. Immediately he was visibly shaken in tear as he told me about it, but felt better after getting it out. I though got shivers as they told it, but told myself that I could just chalk it up to residual trauma from the old house or something. But then this afternoon he mentioned it to his sister, and they started talking about the old house a bit. She mentioned that she was at a Halloween bonfire a few weeks ago with friends and found out that one of her friends is very close with the family that recently moved into that old house. Either the 3rd or 4th family that has lived there since we left, by the way, that friend told her at the bonfire, though, that the family had just had a cleansing or exorcism done on the house after the mom started seeing a shadow man in a top hat. The timing definitely worries me. That exorcism would have happened about a month ago, and now my oldest is dreaming of the place. I have heard that things can latch onto you when you leave a place, but it's been almost 4 years and there just was nothing. I've asked my daughter to get the name of whoever did the work at the old house, and we may actually have a cleansing of our own in the future. I guess I'm just worried that the cleansing just sort of kicked it out of the old place and freed it up to find its way to get back to us. I have no personal experience with cleansings, only what I've seen on TV or in movies really, and so that's why I'm here. Is this possible, or is it just a coincidence? And if it isn't, should we do some sort of cleansing event? This happened a long time ago now, but I remember when I was younger I had a walkie-talkie that my grandma got me for my birthday at one point, and well, one night I'm assuming someone wanted to mess with me, but out of nowhere I heard someone begging and crying for help on that radio. It was probably the scariest experience that I'd ever felt as a kid. Now either someone found my radio channel and decided to mess with me or someone legitimately needed help and young me clearly didn't know what to do in that situation. It definitely felt off in my. I have had odd experiences in my old house when I was younger, like I remember sometimes I heard my mom calling my name but nobody being there. That was probably one of the scarier experiences that I've ever experienced up there with the walkie-talkie, but I have had vivid nightmares to which I could feel things happening to me, and this could be chalked up to an overactive imagination. I know that, but I had this problem with sleeping in my parents' room because I was scared to be alone all time, but every time that I would walk to my parents' room in multiple corners, there were shapes of like dogs staring at me. Now the last experience I remember having is when I was sitting on a bed. From what I can remember of that time, I think I was sitting on my bed and I looked up at something, but as soon as I looked up at it I felt something hit my face and I was physically pushed down weirdly, though as soon as I reached a certain age I remembered it all just sort of stopped suddenly. No nightmares, seeing things in the dark, hearing voices, or having any sort of experience whatsoever. I don't know if this can all be chalked up to just normal overactive child imaginations or if it is something more. I wish that I had proof, and I don't blame you if you don't believe me, but this just suddenly came to my mind and I wanted to archive itself somewhere while I still remembered it. I also wanted to share my experiences to see if anyone else has had anything similar happen to them. This happened when I was about 7 years old. I never really gave this much thought until recently when my mother reminded me that it happened, and now we never really were able to explain it. You see, I was in summer school and during one recess I was playing on the playground with this girl that I had become close to. Usually when recess was over a loud bell would ring to signal that it was time to go back to class. On this particular day the girl and I were lost in our own little world of make-believe. We didn't hear the bell ring and eventually we noticed that we were alone on the playground. The weird thing is that there were yard duties on S side, so an adult would corral the kids if they didn't immediately respond to the bell, but that day there was no adult to tell us to go back inside. No kids crawling on the monkey bars with us. It was just empty. It really felt like the playground had only just vacated after a few minutes, so we figured that we wouldn't get into a huge trouble if we made our way back to the classroom. Upon entering the classroom, the teacher immediately yells out, "Where have you girls been? We've been looking for you." It turns out that 2 hours had passed from the time that the bell rang to when we reappeared. We got yelled at for disappearing, but as a child I never understood why I was in trouble. I mean, I never left the playground, so why was I getting yelled at? Looking back on it, I have to wonder, did we disappear? Does this count as missing time? It really felt like to us that we had taken our research as normal and nothing weird had happened. The creepy thing though is that both that girl I was playing with and I experienced the same thing too, so there's just no way that this is a hallucination coming from my brain alone. I kind of just shook it off as one of those guess we'll never know things, but now that I'm older it really is one of the weirdest things that I've ever experienced. I'm really curious too as to what may have happened during that time. Did we get abducted by aliens, hence the missing time? Did we accidentally slip into a different dimension? Were the FA trying to kidnap us or something? When we realized we were alone it was totally the Oz effect. No noise, just eerie silence. Anyway, I'm not sure why I'm sharing this other than to say something that might resonate with someone. I've always been curious to see if anything similar has happened to anyone else, because as I cannot be the only one that this has happened. Music. To a few years ago my husband and I found a 3-bedroom bungalow that was cheap to rent. The owner who inherited it was a friend of my husband. This guy's father had passed away the previous year and the house was sitting empty that whole time. The owner didn't want to live in it and he didn't even bother returning to the house to remove all the furniture, clothing or belongings from it either. I didn't even get a chance to see the place before we moved in. My husband sprung it on me last minute after our apartment lease was up. It looked okay from the outside, I guess. The windows were dark, but of course no one lived there, so that was normal. Once my husband opened the door and switched on the light in the foyer, I felt that this place wasn't empty. I felt like something was in there watching us. Right away I knew that the original owner had passed away, so I just figured that I was just spooking myself. That first evening the whole house though was full of furniture, knickknacks, personal items, clothing, and it was dark and dusty. I was depressed just looking at it all. The part of the deal for the cheap rent though is that we had to clean it all, so we got a truck and cleaned out the majority of the house. We kept some things like the almost new couch, armchairs, TV and end tables. We kept the master bedroom furniture in there because the mattress was new, the bedding and the furniture were new as well, and it hadn't been used yet. My husband, he traveled for work at the time he left me there alone, and that is when I experienced things that were, well, for a lack of a better term, odd. That feeling of being observed, it didn't go away. I stayed in the front rooms because there was better light there, and it's where our belongings were too. The back part of the bungalow was just always dark though. The first thing that I noticed was scratching sounds in the wall. It's Texas, so it could have been an animal doing that, I admit it, but I heard what sounded like walking along the ceiling. So I remembered one day I was watching a movie, there was this loud stomping up. There I was distractedly thinking to myself, damn the neighbors. Aloud, but then I remembered that there wasn't any upstairs neighbors. I ran outside to see what was on the roof, but nothing, but it really sounded like heavy footsteps crossing from one side of the house to the other. Well, I was also nocturnal back then, and I stayed up all night either watching live streams or painting in the living room. I was in my bedroom watching an old black and white movie on TV this particular night. Outside I could see the pink dawn coming through the curtains, and that's when I heard the knocking, just two sharp knocks. In the upper left-hand side of my bedroom wall over the bed. The bedroom was at the left corner side of the house, and I wondered what it was. Then all along that side of the wall was a what I can only describe as a swishing sound. I pictured someone using a leafy branch, just making swirls with it. On the other side, just a scratchy sort of swirling sound. I hopped out of bed to see what the heck that was. It had to be people. I ran outside and over to the outside of the house, and there was no one. They could have run away, I suppose. But it was just really odd to me. This happened a few more times too. Before I finally answered that knock with a loud hello, the knock itself sounded like a person's knock, intentional to get attention, not like a tapping or something bouncing off the wall. It was two distinct knocks. There was a hesitation, and then it knocked 3 times. I asked, who's there? Then the knocking started going hard and fast. It sounded angry and loud. At that I took off to check the outside again, but nobody was there, and this time I got there quickly too. I went back inside, back to the bedroom. The frantic loud knocking was now accompanied by that swirling sound, and it moved from the left side of the wall to the ceiling. I won't lie, because that one scared me. I called my friend, and then she told me that I was not supposed to ever answer the knock or go outside for 2 reasons. Apparently, if it had been a person scaring me, I could have been hurt, which I'll admit was good advice, and second, whatever that was, it was bad, and I interacted with it. Now this went on for nearly 30 minutes. I left the bedroom to go sit shaking in the living room while I just chatted with my friend. She wouldn't accept any pictures or videos of it either. But after that occurrence, I made sure to ignore all noises and just act like everything was okay, and surprisingly the activity had died down. We painted the back room, but it didn't seem to make it brighter. It always stayed gloomy, and when we attempted to sleep in the master bedroom with the ensuite at the back of the house, neither one of us could sleep. I was facing the bedroom door, and several times when I woke up, that door would be open again. I felt as though someone was staring at us from the kitchen each time. It was also very cold and uncomfortable in there because of all these things and some other things that were happening in our life. We moved away after about a year. I was born in Moscow, Russia in the early 90s, but my brother was born in 1980, and this is his story. So I was about 7 to 8 years old. And me, along with my friends, were the absolute biggest idiots in terms of doing stupid and dangerous things. We would make smoke bombs, fireworks, etc. out of whatever we found, and did tons of stupid other things too. Russia in the late 80s resembled the post-apocalyptic wasteland you see in movies in a lot of places, mainly because there was really no law and order, so no one cared. You were able to buy crazy things off the streets too. My father was once offered an old rocket launcher. In fact, with this, parents often just let their kids mess around in these places, so we would do stupid things in these abandoned buildings. But one day we were messing around when one of my friends noticed someone lurking nearby. We didn't really care. I mean, we were used to seeing weird stuff, but after a bit we noticed the person was not really moving. They just sort of stood there. When he noticed that we had seen him, the man slowly walked into view, a large bald man with a black coat, a nice one too, likely an import, which was expensive at the time, in American sneakers, also very expensive. He didn't really greet us or anything, but must have seen me looking at his shoes, because he just said, like, my shoes, I have more if you want them. Come on now. A few things really unnerved any of us, but this dude definitely did. If you know anything about Russia in that era, this dude looked like someone you did not want to mess with. The kicker, though, was once he turned around, my friend noticed that he had a gun in his pants. To the second that he saw that, he just yelled gun and booked it, and we all just scattered. I heard the guy curse loudly, but I didn't see him again after that. Now, if the story ended here, it would have just been a bit of a creepy encounter, but sometime later we were no longer allowed to play in that area, and I found out much later that they had unfortunately found a child down there who was dead after horrible circumstances, which I won't go into. To be honest, as a kid I never really thought much about this until my parents told me about the death, at which point the dots connected and I realized what we potentially ran away from that day. Something unexplainable happened to me yesterday morning, and I'm curious to know if this has happened to anyone else. Note too that before this I had been having some weird experiences happen lately in my house. Bathroom light turning off on its own, hearing a voice call out my name, noises coming from my door, etc. So yesterday morning I woke up and Went on my phone right away to check my notifications. My phone had been on all night because I play relaxing music on YouTube while I'm sleeping. I have anxiety, but when I go on my phone, my notifications are just going crazy as though my phone had been on airplane mode for the entire night. They just continuously keep spamming all at once, which I thought was weird. That's obviously not the creepy part, but I checked my notifications and I noticed a missed call or a voicemail. At first I thought it could have been a job interviewer calling me. I'd been waiting to hear back from this place, so naturally I clicked the number to call them back, and the landline phone in my house starts ringing. For context, I'm living with my grandparents, and while they're pretty old school, I never have ever called their landline before. Like ever, I only ever call my grandpa's cell. My number isn't registered on their landline, and their number has never been used to call me. But this is where it gets even weirder. So while the landline is ringing, my grandpa had just gotten back home maybe 10 minutes prior. It's approximately about 10:15 to 10:20 a.m. He was out all morning. He starts heading down the hallway towards my room. I jump out of bed, open my door. I sort of look to him in disbelief and ask, "Why did you call me earlier?" He responds though that he hadn't. Then I show him the missed call on my phone. At this point it was apparent to me that this number that called me was definitely our landline, so I say to him, "See, you called me. You left a voicemail and it says here missed at 9:35 a.m. My grandpa then says, "How could I have called you when I've been gone all morning? I just got back like 10 minutes ago." Well then who did? Nobody else was in the house except me at the time when the call was made. A phone call definitely made inside of my own house, mind you too. This phone would not just glitch and call a number that isn't even registered in its own phone book. At this point I haven't listened to the voicemail yet. After me and my grandpa discuss what happened, I go and listen. Now what I heard isn't super exciting or anything. It made sort of like a beep sound, but then the landline was calling me long enough to the point when you hit the voicemail box. I'm really not sure how to explain this, so if you have any similar stories or have an explanation for this, then I would genuinely love to hear it, just to ease my mind a bit, because it's definitely creeped me out. Also, I just re-listened to the voicemail carefully, and I don't think it was just a beep in the end. It was like when you put the phone down to end the call and then the beep. It only lasted 2 seconds, but that has me even more creeped out now. I work in a small mountain resort made of semi-private cabins. There's about 30 cabins in all, spaced out enough to feel like you're alone in the mountains. I've had paranormal experiences in 2 of the cabins at this point, and while it's nothing super crazy, yesterday left me feeling really spooked. This experience takes place in cabin number 30. So about 3 weeks ago I was deep cleaning cabin 30. I was in this cabin for my entire shift. I was listening to a funny show on low volume, and over my earphones I heard what sounded like someone walking on the front deck. I opened the door, and when I did, nothing was there. Keep in mind too that I've worked here for a while now and can recognize any normal noises reverse when someone is coming to the door. I chalked it up to my show, and so I just continued cleaning. I unplugged a nearby lamp, wrapped the cord around it, and put it securely onto a table. I walked across the cabin and then turned back towards the lamp to see the lamp cord unraveled and swinging off the side of the table. Not a gentle swing as if it had unraveled somehow, but like fully swinging with force. I froze for a second because I made sure that it was in the center of the table, secured. I really don't know how it could have slipped off and started swinging the way that it was. Nothing else happened for the remainder of the day, but that certainly left me pretty unsettled. Cut to yesterday though, and I'm back in cabin 30 doing a regular clean again. I'm listening to a show. Completely forgot about the experience from the last time I cleaned the cabin. I'm wiping down the kitchen when I sort of catch movement from my peripheral, so I turned around, but there was nothing there. I'm thinking that it must have been a fly or something. I really don't know, but I turn back towards the kitchen and start getting a very eerie feeling all of a sudden, like I'm being watched. I'm a bit of a veteran in the feeling of being watched. Unfortunately, I lived in a very haunted house growing up. Another story for another time, but there's a light on the SE feeling a little behind where I'm standing, and as I'm trying to ignore the feeling, suddenly a large shadow is cast next to me from the kitchen light onto the counter to the left of me. I can tell you that I whipped around so fast thinking that someone came in, and I just didn't hear them due to my earphones, only to find the cabin completely empty. I was really startled by that. My heart was racing, and I once again just froze because I mean, what the heck, right? The shadow though was clear as day, cast directly next to me. I genuinely thought that a maintenance worker had come into the room or something like that, but I can assure you that it was just me. I left the room to get some fresh air, where I proceeded to have a bit of a mini freakout. I had to finish the cabin that day as someone was checking in, so I went back in and just said out loud, "I'm just here to clean and I'm almost done. Please just let me finish without any issues." Did I feel insane? Well, yes. Did anything else happen? No, but I sped the rest of the way through and I got out of there. Now when I go back in tomorrow, I've gotten permission from my manager to sage the cabin, and if you have any advice on how I should cleanse whatever bad juju is in there for my mental well-being, well, I'm all ears. I've never done a sage cleanse, but I will refuse to go back in there if I don't. I will be doing this, and I really hope it. Music works. To start things off, I don't really believe in angels or demons or God and the devil, but I do believe that there is dark entities that exist out there. What they are I really don't know, but I believe that there's something. When I was growing up, my family moved into a suburban neighborhood in Pennsylvania, and as my parents' first house, it was a decent sized and beautiful place. I had 3 siblings at the time when we moved, and me being the oldest, I was around the age of maybe 5 or 6 at the time, but fast forward to around the age of 8 to N when I have the most vivid memories of the occurrences that I would always see glowing red eyes in the shadows of my closet. This as well as my younger sister as well, who also would see and scream, crying to our parents, rats with red eyes. They shrugged it off as children with a wild imagination, typical monsters under the bed deal. At some point though, I would complain that I would have heard my name being called, but it was by an unfamiliar voice. My sister would say the same thing too. We both slept in the upper level of the house. It was 2 floors with a half-finished basement. My parents were obviously concerned, but they shrugged it off for the time being. Eventually my mother began to experience similar things though, and started to believe us. Her being a Christian, she spoke with our pastor, who told us to cleanse the house, in which we recited a prayer and drew a cross and an olive oil on the wall. This only made things worse though. The red eyes and the voices continued. My companion aimed by shade figures out of the corner of my eye, and at night both my sister and I would shriek at these things. Men hide under the covers begging for it to go away. Sometimes their parents would come up and turn on the lights to see the commotion and all that, and they would see that nothing was there. Sometimes things would fall to, move or shake on its own. Lights would shut off without an explanation. Doors would slam, chairs moved, whole shebang of ghostly stuff that you see on TV. My mother, being a paranormal believer, always tried to comfort us and give us the benefit of the doubt. My father, however, was a huge skeptic, until one night when I came down crying about the monster sitting on the steps to the basement, being told that it was okay, that there's no monster, when suddenly the door slammed closed and I felt a push throwing me down the steps of the basement. Absolutely traumatized by that, my mother rushed to open the door and dragged me out of there, and I slept in her room while she said some prayers. This continued to go on for a few years. My parents constantly trying to cleanse the house, even having a pastor at our church come and do it, but it would always continue and just get worse. There would be cold spots and more intense activity there. I was home alone one day when I was about 12, I would guess. In our basement where the computer was set up, there was nobody there and no windows open or anything, when all of a sudden the shelves down there were forcefully pushed over, crashing down right next to me. I ran and waited outside until my parents came home, terrified of what was in that house. Events like this occurred regularly. My dogs would bark, I would see shadows, hear things, and my family experienced the same things. However, my sister and I definitely got the worst of it. It got to the point when I was old enough to sort of comprehend it that I would read Bible verses and rebuke the demon in order to fend it off or get the heck out of there. It never really worked. Mind you, another occurrence I vividly remember that shook me though to the core was I was watching a big shadowy sort of figure across the room to my sister's bed hover over her bed in a TV lit room. I think it noticed me waking up in a sweat, and it must have noticed me staring at it, looked back, and I sat there in shock, eventually hiding under the blanket. I could hear it breathing, and I felt pressure of its presence over my body. All of a sudden I eventually must have passed out from fear or fallen asleep or something, because that's the last thing that I remember. How when I was around 14 though, my cousins, caretakers, my grandmother and grandpa, had both fallen ill, and my grandmother passed away shortly after this. The 3 of them had come to live with us, and the events continued, and they noticed it too. We were all terrified of that basement and the upstairs level as well, where things occurred the most. There would be nights where all of us would sort of huddle in one room, laying closely, listening to things move and noises while nobody was there to be making them. The pastor came again, and sometime around the end did the same old. And surprisingly it got better for a bit, but I believe that my dysfunctional family and negative events drew it back out, and they continued. Things went south for a while, and my parents got a divorce. My mother got into drugs and whatnot, and we eventually moved to a town home with my father. But even as we were moving and leaving that house, it was always creepy. To this day I've had lifelong trauma, and I'm still uncomfortable in the pitch black. I don't like attics or unfinished basements, and I do believe that there was something in that house. I never really get to talk about this much except for with my sister, so I appreciate you guys listening to it. I wanted to share my experiences, and well, I hope that you guys have a good day. Music? So to start, I want to say that although I've had, I think, some paranormal activity in my life, I try to be logical about it when it comes to experiences like this. I would say 99 times out of 100 there's a reasonable explanation for the weird things that happen, but lately it's just been, well, Strange. Some backstory to start though. My husband has had tanties for years now. Some days are good but mostly bad, and one day he said that he felt like he was going schizo, and I chatted up to him going crazy with the ringing in his ears and that reality was getting harder for him to deal with. I comforted him but didn't ask too many questions. Sometimes he just wants to vent and not answer a 100 questions. So fast forward to me sitting in bed a couple of weeks ago, and in the doorway I see what looks like part of a head poke around the corner, peering into the room, then quickly jerk back into the hall. I knew that nobody was upstairs, but I got up, saw my husband downstairs on the couch, and asked if he was just upstairs. He replied no, and I said, well, I just saw what looked like someone peering into the room at the corner of my eye. I joked about shadow people because at this point with living in our house it's kind of been an on and off occurrence. I'm honestly not even really that fazed by it, more fascinated if anything, but he said, you know, it's weird. Because I felt like I've been going literally crazy. I've been seeing stuff like that a lot recently. We both were a little bit weirded out by that, but oh well at this point. Then a week ago he was in bed and he saw something move at the corner of our bed, then suddenly disappear. Another weird occurrence I experienced was right before I saw the head in my doorway. I had a sort of strange sleep paralysis moment. I was laying in bed vibing with this sort of odd energetic flow, not realizing that I was asleep while my husband was laying to the left of me, when all of a sudden a hand slid onto my stomach from the right side. I freaked out, screaming in my dream for help, and finally woke up. My husband was asleep and the weight of the sleep paralysis lifted, but sometimes when I wake up from that state my brain feels sort of full, like it's still working out of the sleep chemicals, and I haven't regained full alertness yet. It's very odd, but during this state I can see things move that aren't there. So I look and there's a shadowy sort of figure on top of him. I thought it was him moving his legs in the dark, but then I realized that it wasn't. As soon as I realized that it wasn't, I noticed this thing was holding something that looked like a phone screen almost. It was just a rectangular sort of white light. I told myself that I must still be in a dreamlike state because of the way that my head felt. I put the covers over me and tried to relax until I was more awake, and with it then I looked at my husband's side of the bed again where his legs were, and whatever it was, it had vanished. I told myself that it must have been the moonlight, even though my curtains were fully closed again. I'm so used to weird stuff that I'm just not even afraid of it anymore, just really interested in what is actually going on, whether it's some scientific phenomenon or something actually paranormal. But then today I got weirded out by something out of the blue. You see, I was working the lunchroom at my kid's school, and at the table where my kids sat last week in the exact same spot there was a sort of small Tupperware container missing a lid. Last week she lost this piece and only had the lid, and I noticed the missing Tupperware right away because, well, OCD I guess, and I couldn't find it anywhere, but here it was today right where she sat today. That side of the table was empty with other kids sitting on the opposite end, and I was like, oh, someone probably picked it up and just put it there. But it was weird that it was exactly where she was sitting. Then a little while later one of the kids sitting at the other end of this table was very distraught. All of a sudden she had one strawberry left in her lunch, and she got up, came back, and it was gone. I said, well, maybe you ate it and just forgot about it, or it fell or something, but she swore up and down that she had one left and someone must have taken it. I was like, well, we're going to have to let that one go, because if no one comes forward we can't accuse people of taking it. I know that this is very off topic from the shadow people, but I definitely had some intrusive thoughts of maybe things are disappearing into another time or something. I even thought, is this table some weird time jumping portal victimizing Tupperware and strawberries? I know, ridiculous, but that just can't be right, and it's just a case of kids being kids, right, and misplacing or taking stuff. But with all the incredibly weird stuff happening lately, I just cannot help that my brain is going to crazy places of thought. But if a lone strawberry magically reappears in that spot next week, well, it will be the end of my sanity for sure. I was also wondering if anyone else has been experiencing occurrences that seem strange like this and out of the ordinary. I swear too that I really am a logical person and don't like giving too much weight to the paranormal like this. Especially when there's most likely a logical explanation, but for whatever reason the air just feels different all of a sudden. I also really enjoy hearing about unexplainable things from other people, so if you have anything to share then I would love to hear. Music? And I don't usually share stuff like this, but genuinely I'm freaking out a bit and I could really use some advice. So something really strange has been happening the last few nights. I've been too scared to tell anyone, but I feel like I have to now. It started 2 nights ago. I was lying in bed trying to sleep when I heard this sort of soft tapping noise. At first I thought it was just the wind or maybe a tree branch, but then it came again, 3 taps. It was from my window. I live in a 1-story house, so it's not that high up, but it's weird because really there's nothing outside of my window except our backyard and a tall fence. I tried to ignore it, but the tapping didn't stop. I finally worked up the courage to get out of bed and peek through the blinds, and that was when I Saw him. There was a man standing outside just staring at my window. He was tall, with a pale face that looked almost empty, like there was nothing behind his eyes. He didn't move and he just kept staring at me. I panicked and ducked down. My heart was racing and I didn't know what to do. After a moment I finally crawled back into bed and pulled the covers over my head, but I didn't sleep that night. The next day when the sun rose, I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, or maybe it was just a dream or something. But last night it happened again, the same soft tapping, the same man outside of my window. This time I didn't even look though. I just froze, hoping that he would go away. I told my parents about it this morning, but they didn't believe me. They think I'm just having nightmares or something to that effect, and they told me to stop watching scary movies before bed. But I know what I saw tonight. I'm scared to go to sleep. I mean, what if he comes back? What if he tries to get in? I've checked the window multiple times to make sure that it's locked, but I feel like it's just not enough, and so I really don't know what to do. Should I be calling the police or something? I'm scared and I just need someone to believe me, so please do believe me that this is happening, and I really could use your advice. When I was about 7 to 8 years old, I lived near a woods called Lilford Woods, and me and my brothers and friends played there many times. We used to make rope swings from trees that were at the side of a World War II bomb crater. But one day, me and my older brother and my best friend at the time, we were there as usual at one weekend, and this particular day we could hear a flute playing music, and it seemed to be coming from sort of all around us. We searched all over to find the source, but we ended up giving up when it eventually stopped, and we decided to head home as it was close for us to be home time for tea anyway. So we started to head home, and then the music started again, but again we just couldn't determine its source. We made it to the edge of the woods and had to climb a small fence that opened up to a large field, and in the middle of that field we could see a man sat cross-legged playing the flute. We approached him and told him that we could hear him from miles away. From my first impression, he looked out of place. His clothes didn't match the era, which at the time would have been the late 80s. He looked like he was from the 70s or the 60s maybe. His clothes didn't look like anything that you would see anybody wearing at the time. We asked him if he could play any other instruments, and he said that he could play the guitar. We asked him if he could play any songs that we knew at the time, which was like George Michael, but he said that he had never heard of him. We asked some other questions, but my older brother said that it was time for us to go home. We all started running across the field, which led to a tree line which we had to go through. That led us to the dirt road again. It took us no more than 30 seconds to get there, but then as we were running down the dirt road we could hear the flute playing again, and as we're still running we looked to our left back towards where the man was. We could see him sort of running parallel to us on the field, but through the tree line. Then as we're still running we looked away from him to look forward, which would have been milliseconds at most, and about 100 m away we saw him jumping down a sewage manhole. It took us about 20 seconds to reach it, and when we got there was no cover over the manhole, and all we could see was rushing water, but the hole seemed too small for a man to even fit through. We all thought that it was weird, but at the time we were young and naive and thought older people were just stronger and faster than us and could do things that kids couldn't. The following Monday we all went to school and we were telling friends about what we had witnessed, and a lunch lady overheard us and asked us to describe him, and she also asked us if we had made the story up, and obviously we said no, and she told us that he fits the description of a 23-year-old man that unfortunately had ended his own life in the woods in the 70s. When I think back, I remember his neck looked very red and sore too, and if you understand what I'm saying, well, that's the way that he ended it. We never did hear or see anything again after that. I'm 43, so is my friend, and my older brother is 45, and we all remember it the same way. My older brother is certainly the sort of guy that believes in facts and figures and what you can see, and even he can only explain all of it as music, supernatural. About 4 years ago my husband and I moved into our current house. For the first few months we had a roommate, and while she was here we didn't notice anything weird, but over the past 3 years we've been noticing more and more things. Like I'll be home alone at times and will see things out of the corner of my eye. What I usually see the most is if the bathroom door is open and I'm looking in the mirror, I will see a lady standing in the kitchen. That doesn't really scare me since I've lived in a few different places that have been haunted, and I've dealt with quite a few paranormal things in the past year, though it's gotten worse. My husband has started sleepwalking, even though he never has in the past. Our dog will be barking at things that aren't there, and I can't find anything that he would usually bark at. He doesn't usually bark unless someone he doesn't know comes over. I have multiple times woken up with scratches, which could be me scratching myself, I admit, in my sleep, but that never happened before living here, so it's a bit odd. We hear whispering and footsteps outside of our bedroom door at night. Our dog has also recently started having seizures, which the only explanation the vet has had for that is that it could be anxiety related. Now I've dealt with some pretty intense hauntings, but nothing quite like this. I've tried cleansing the house multiple times, and every time it calms down temporarily, but it never sticks. And I don't just mean just sage. I have tried countless types of herbs, candles, crystals, incenses, moon water, salt around the house, and even having other people come over who know how to deal with spirits. What I'm trying to say is that I'm certainly not a beginner on this type of stuff. In fact, a lot of people have come to me for help with anything like this in the past. We live in the basement of a house, and we have had multiple upstairs neighbors since we moved in, and each one has separately said that they have noticed things too. When we first moved in, our landlord mentioned that the previous tenants left after about a month of living here with no notice and no explanation. A few months after we moved in, right after our old roommate moved out, they were doing renovations upstairs and found a petrified cat under the floorboards. We have had different people come over to hang out, and multiple people have seen something standing in the same corner. We don't mention that the house is haunted, and anyone who comes over says that they saw something. Even my best friend, who didn't believe in ghosts before this place, said that he saw something standing in the corner. I always feel like I'm being watched too. Even when nobody else is in the house, I am very receptive of energy and sense that whatever is here is Levent, but I've been able to create at least a bit of a barrier between us. I think I would usually know what to do in the case of a normal haunting, and have successfully cleansed multiple places before, but this is way beyond my expertise, so that's why I'm here. If you have any advice, it would be greatly appreciated. I also don't know if this is related at all, but I have an antique music box from Japan that I've had since I was a kid. When I got it, I didn't notice anything off about it, but when I started to pick up on energy, I realized that there is something attached to it. I think I have tried to get rid of it multiple times, like throw it out and all that, but every time that I try to get rid of it, it always ends up somewhere that I end up finding it again. The song is extremely out of tune at this point. It wasn't when I got it, obviously, and it will sometimes play on its own still, even if the box is closed, even if it's been years since I wound it up. I don't know if it's just adding more to what's already going on here, or if it's connected somehow, but I thought that I should mention it. Like I said, I've dealt with a lot of things, but this is all new for me. I'm willing to try anything at this point. Really, I feel it follows me out of the house as well, and even one of my coworkers has told me that something has been following me. I try my best not to be scared, since they usually gives entities more power, but I always just feel a bit on edge now, and that certainly cannot be good. A few years ago, a 35-year-old male had a terrifying experience that still haunts me today. I was living in a busy city at the time, and I had just finished a late shift at work. It was around 10 p.m. and I was walking home through the quieter side streets of my neighborhood. I'm someone who's always been somewhat cautious, I guess you could say, so I was alert, keeping an eye out for any unusual activity. As I walked down the street, I noticed a guy about 20 foot behind me. At first I didn't think much of it. He seemed like just another person walking the same route, but something about his movements just caught my attention. I guess he wasn't walking in a normal manner. He was clearly trying to keep his distance, but his pace matched mine no matter how fast or slow I went. After a few blocks, I decided to take a detour. I turned onto a side street that was a little less populated. Hoping that he wouldn't follow, I checked over my shoulder, and sure enough, he was still there. It's hard to describe, but I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Instantly, my instincts told me that something just wasn't right. I crossed the street hoping that that would throw him off, but he crossed too without hesitation. I thought, okay, this is weird. Now I had to make a decision, though I wasn't that far from home, but something about this guy's persistence made me uncomfortable, so I decided to stop at a nearby 24/7 convenience store to try to lose him. The store was empty, save for the cashier, who barely looked up from their phone. I quickly grabbed a drink and stood by the door, hoping to see if the guy would pass by. He didn't. He stopped right outside of the store. At this point, I could see his face clearly through the glass, and he was staring directly at me. I passed Ped and ran back into the aisles, trying to calm myself down. I could hear his footsteps growing louder as he approached the door. I couldn't stay here any longer, so I tried to pay, but I was so rattled that I couldn't focus on anything. The cashier just sort of stared at me, probably wondering why I looked so frantic. I threw the drink on the counter, paid quickly, and bolted out the door. I ran down another street, not wanting to look back, but knowing that I had to. I didn't see him for a while, and my heart slowly started to calm down. But as I turned the corner to my street, that was when I saw him again, standing at the far end of the block, and quite honestly, it was like he had been waiting there the whole time. I really wasn't sure what to do next. I considered calling the police, but he hadn't really done anything illegal, just followed me for a while. I didn't want to overreact, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a coincidence. He was still standing there, watching me, and now he was closer. I took a deep breath, checked both ways, and made a beeline for my apartment building, not daring to look back until I was inside. When I got into my apartment, I locked the door and stayed there, staring out the window for what felt like hours. I didn't see him again after that. night, but the whole experience really left me unsettled. For weeks I never felt comfortable walking home alone late at night after that too. Even though I've lived in the city my entire life, I still wonder if I was just being paranoid, but there was something off about the way that he followed me. It felt intentional, and it left me with a gut feeling that I just cannot shake. Music. I was 9 years old when me and my little brother, 5 and male, were invited to a sleepover. My mother, she had just become acquainted with a man from a church whom spoke of his children wonderfully. I remember him saying that he had them for the weekend due to custody. When we arrived, we asked about the children. Turns out though that they were arriving sometime soon. The man invited us to the pool, and so we spent part of the day chilling and playing in the pool. When the sun went down, we decided to head back in and take a shower. I made sure to stick by my baby brother while the man was in the living room. I didn't trust the man for some reason. I also remember thinking about the children. I don't remember seeing any kid pictures or anything like that, not even on his phone's background. I think by then that it was clear that there were no children coming. In fact, no children ever existed. I remember that there was a Wii that we spent most of the night playing, but no children were ever seen. I don't remember much after that other than telling my mother that we never saw any children. Of course, she was spooked and never left us alone at church ever again. And also, we never saw that man ever again. This happened years ago, and now I'm a 19-year-old boy and reliving the memories of the man with no children inviting us for a sleepover really creeps me. Music. Out. So I live in Australia. It was 2017. After a long late class at university, I was walking home dead tired and just wanted to collapse into bed. The streets were quiet, just the occasional flickering street light accompanied me as I walked home. As I got closer to my place, I noticed someone slouched in my doorway, a figure sort of huddled up against the door, wrapped in layers of worn-out clothes. As I got nearer, I realized that it was a woman, most likely homeless. Her face was hidden beneath a tattered hat, but then she looked up and our eyes met. Her face was tired, but her eyes were intense, as if she was guarding that spot for dear life. I froze. Slowly she raised a beat-up walking stick and pointed it at me, her grip tight. Suddenly she snapped, "Get out," her voice rough and firm, and her teeth, oh my goodness, were completely yellow and rotten, the kind of teeth that you would genuinely see in zombie movies. The threat, it felt real. She was clearly ready to use the stick if I took another step. I took a cautious step forward, my mind racing. It was my place after all, but she seemed so tense and defensive. I wanted to say something to calm her down, but words failed me before I could even say a word. She hit my head hard twice with her stick. Instinct took over, and I turned, walked quickly, almost running back down the street. A couple of blocks away was the university security station, and I practically stumbled in trying to catch my breath. I told the officer on duty about the woman on my porch and asked if someone could come with me. The officer nodded, maybe a little bit perplexed, but he came along when we got back to my place. Though the porch was now empty, she was gone. The officer did a quick look around and just shrugged. "Looks like she moved on," he said, giving me a reassuring nod before heading back to the station. I thanked him, relieved, but definitely still on edge. The whole thing happened so quickly, but I felt like I'd been holding my breath the entire time. But even after she was gone I just couldn't quite shake it. For weeks, every time I came home after dark, I found myself bracing as I got close to the door, half expecting to see her sitting there, eyes glaring up at me with those rotten teeth showing. I started leaving the porch light on, checking the lock twice before bed just in case. It wasn't so much about feeling unsafe. I guess I just couldn't forget her face, that fierce, weary look, or the way that she guarded my doorway like it was her last refuge. The memory, it stuck with me now and then. I wonder what happened to her, whether she ever thought about that night again, or if I was just another stranger into her endless drift through the city. I've never really had any kind of paranormal experience before this, but generally I've always believed that there was more to this life. So the other week I was sat on my friend's sofa facing his living room door whilst he had his back to it when I, out of nowhere, saw a long pair of like grayish fingers creep around the door, and a woman that I can only describe as the woman from Shooter Island. Literally Google Shooter Island woman and it should show you exactly what I saw. Poked her head around, briefly scanned the room, locked eyes with me, and suddenly turned and disappeared from my line of sight. The weirdest thing is that another friend walked through that door almost instantly after she disappeared and swears blind that there was no one there. I was so sure though that somebody was in the house that we looked in every room. Twice I've tripped before years ago, so I know what that feels like, and even then you don't see entities with vivid clarity. That I saw her with. The strangest thing is that 2 of my friends have seen an entity poking its head around doors in different locations, and I spoke to them both separately while holding back most of the story, and both of them filled in the gaps, assuring me that they're telling the truth. So my question for all of you guys is, should I be worried about this, and how should I deal with her if she returns? This happened about 21 years ago when I was around 9 years old, but I still Vividly remember that day. So I was with my grandmother and her dog, a big black Great Dane, but we were walking on the side of a little country road in the middle of the woods. It was about a 20-minute walk from my house, and we used to come here for picking up chestnuts a lot. At some point the dog went a little further into the woods and I started to follow him. At the same time a car arrived on the road and stopped. I looked at my grandma and she made acid to tell me to stay where I was. I saw her talking with the driver. He looked like a middle-aged man from where I was. I couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but I heard my grandma raise her voice. I saw the man open his car door. I was sure that he was about to grab my grandmother and I was terrified. She screamed to me to run into the woods. But a big dark shadow ran into the guy. It was the dog. I think he must have heard the panic in my grandma's voice and that he understood that there was danger. The guy obviously got scared and quickly closed the car door and then he peeled out of there. I asked my grandmother what happened and she just told me that he was a crazy man and that we should go home through the woods and stay away from the road. She also told me to stay close to the dog, and thankfully we got home and didn't see the man again from that day on, though we never went picking up chestnuts in that area again, and we stopped doing that. That was only a few minutes long, turned into years of fear and anxiety for all of us. Fun fact too is that despite his size, that dog was usually a completely harmless dog who basically got scared of everything, even cats or chickens, but that day he was honestly the bravest dog on earth. I, a 19-year-old female, have been with my boyfriend, 21, and male, over 4 years now. Throughout our relationship he told me that he keeps experiencing sleep paralysis and that it became more and more frequent. He had maybe 1 or 2 the first 3 years, but last year they definitely kept getting worse. We're both students and for the past 2 years he's been living in a rented apartment with a good friend of his. Sometimes I spend the night there as well. And one time in May he told me that he experienced sleep paralysis again and that he was aware and awake but wasn't able to move or say anything. Like his lips were sort of glued together. He said that he tried to scream my name to wake me up so that I could help him, but nothing ever came out of his mouth. He also mentioned that he kept seeing in one of the corners of the room a huge black shadow that made him feel nauseous, and he eventually got out of it and went back to bed. Now the next day I was still there. He asked me to stay with him in case something happened again because he starts to get a bit scared by it. I tried to stay awake in case something happened, but I think I immediately fell asleep, which is just like me. Hey, don't judge. I'm weak like that, but this is how I was woken up in the middle of the night. So I heard some sounds and I immediately opened my eyes, and he was my boyfriend, laying on the side with his back at me, resting his head on one hand and saying random stuff in a language that I have never heard before, looking at the exact same corner that he mentioned about when he had the sleep paralysis. I could have swore too that I saw something moving in the corner almost, but the weirdest thing is that it seemed like he was having an actual conversation. He would talk and then stop, like as if somebody was answering, and then he would talk again, and so on and so forth. I was like, what the heck is he doing, and called his name. He immediately stopped talking, and then the heaviest silence filled the room for what seemed like an eternity here. Then he started hysterically laughing for a few seconds and then just passed out of nowhere. I checked to see if he was okay, and he started snoring, so at least I knew he fell back to sleep. I wasn't able to sleep that night. I turned around and cried until I saw the light outside. The next day I told him about it and he apologized for scaring me. I said that it wasn't his fault, but it was clear that he felt bad. We asked his friend if he had heard anything and he said no, which made me feel like maybe I was just dreaming, but then he added that he woke up as well that night but wasn't able to move, felt like he couldn't breathe, and claiming that he saw the weirdest shadow in the corner of his room. The apartment, it is consecrated, but I always feel uneasy being there. Another thing I'll add to, although I don't know if it's important or not, but my boyfriend's roommate has nightmares pretty often as well and would wake up screaming every time. If you've listened to me this long, then thank you. I've always loved paranormal stories and active IIS and creepy stuff like these, and I was pretty excited to share these with you, although I will admit that it is another thing along together to experience it yourself. So I am from Madrid, Spain. My family is from a small mountain city. We're all familiar with the mountains here. Even though I live in Madrid, I always go to hike in the mountain range surrounding Madrid. I would not consider us to be very superstitious and or believe strongly in supernatural events, although I am a huge fan of folklore. But this story, it happened in summer back when I was 14 years old. My mother took me and my brother for a week-long trip to a mountain range in the southeast of Spain, close to the old town of Valle. We had already spent half of the week going on multiple hikes, and we visited beautiful lakes where me and my brother could swim despite them being super cold. Overall, we had already had a lot of fun and we were enjoying our small family trip so far. Now one day, while it was very sunny and warm, we went on a hike again to this kind of like abandoned trail, I guess, which some of the locals of the village, they had recommended it. It wasn't accessible by car and there was no phone service. We didn't care though, because we loved to spend time in nature and we would just spend our time walking and Talking instead of being on our phones, we found a crystal clear lake at one point with beautiful turquoise, greenish water and lots of water vegetation in it too. My brother and I immediately jumped in, and afterwards we had a picnic for lunch. So far so good. Right, suddenly while we were enjoying our lunch we heard a loud scream. It was very high-pitched and sort of just overall scary, I guess, considering the fact that we were next to the lake in a small valley between tall mountains. We could hear it kind of echoing. All three of us immediately looked at each other, sort of startled. We were certainly not imagining anything. From what we could deduce, the sound came from the other side of the lake in a very sort of bushy area. The lake itself was not very big, and we decided to make our way around it to investigate, because although we had not seen anyone during the entire day out there, maybe someone was in danger or maybe someone needed help. I cannot really specify what the scream exactly sounded like in hindsight. It was not your typical scream for help, but who knows what humans are capable of sounding like when in dire need of help. Right, anyway, after a 20-minute walk we were already getting to the entrance of the bushy area at the other side of the lake, all three of us approaching with our walking sticks in hand and in a cautious position. The first thing that we noticed was an awful smell of like rotting flesh. That, together with the scream earlier, made us feel a sudden sense of dread. Normally you would feel welcome when helping someone out, but we didn't feel welcome at all in this place. My instincts were telling me that we should just backtrack our way out of there while not losing sight of the bushy area. That is, however, we could not shake the feeling that we had to help if someone needed it, so we decided to proceed slowly. Instead, the joy and the laughter that we had on the other side of the lake was now gone. Whatever was going on at this side of the lake, it felt wrong and ominous. Now I cannot talk to my brother or mother's behalf, but the hair on my arms was standing on end, and after making our way through the bush for 10 minutes we finally reach a sort of clearing area. During this whole time the sense of dread had continued, and the awful smell of rotting flesh had only increased. Finally, in the middle of the clearing, we saw what had caused this smell. In what seemed to be the perfect middle of this small clearing we found the dead corpse of a deer, or at least what remained from it. The limbs were removed from its torso and the head was well half-eaten. The thing is that the cadaver looked fairly fresh, as if it was killed that same day. However, the smell was still that of a rotting and decayed corpse, which I don't know, that did not make any sense. We checked for footprints or dung in the clearing, but we didn't find anything. I guess a logical explanation would be wolves or maybe even bears, since we have both of them in rural Spain. However, the missing footprints and the way of how this deer was ripped apart made it seem almost unnatural. After we had checked the surroundings, we left as quickly as possible, and on our way back we did not stop to rest at the lake or anything. We just wanted to get out of there as quickly as we could. Now, when we were leaving the valley behind us, halfway up one of the surrounding mountains, we heard yet another scream similar to the first one. However, this time we didn't feel the urgency to check if someone needed help. Instead, we paced up our speed, and we didn't go back. Somewhere in the evening, when we finally had made it back to our village, we went for dinner at a small old bar in the picture's town square. We talked to some of the elder people from the village about our experience with their abandoned trail and all that, and they told us that apparently we had somewhere taken a wrong turn on the trail, since it was not very clear, and that this was the reason we ended up at the valley with the lake. They also told us that a few centuries back, during the Spanish Inquisition, the local townspeople had gone to that valley because a so-called witch lived there and set her house on fire, killing the poor old woman. So since then the locals never hike close to that lake or its surroundings in the valley. A couple of days later we left to go back home, but we have never been able to shake the feeling of the dread that we experienced that day. Again, we are not superstitious or big believers of the supernatural by any means, but what happened on that day was definitely weird. I was a third shifter in Wisconsin, us around 2014, who lived about 20 minutes from my workplace in the country. Now, as I was pulling up into the section of the country back road that immediately led into the city, I saw probably the strangest sight that I have ever seen in my life, and I cannot explain it. It was twilight, almost evening, and so the trees were all black against the dark blue sky, and I simply happened to glance up at the top of one of the trees as I was driving, and what I originally thought was the top of the tree flew up into the air at lightning speed and disappeared. It looked like a humanoid thing with wings, but it was so fast that I could barely make out anything else, but it definitely had legs and wings. It just lifted up. The figure with wings that I thought was the top of the tree just flew up and disappeared lightning fast. I've never seen anything fly that fast. Honestly, it was like a blink. I remember stopping my car outside of my workplace and just sitting there and thinking about what I just saw and wondering if I was crazy or if I imagined it. We don't have any animals or anything natural that looks anything like that, so have no idea what it was. I decided not to tell my coworkers or anybody ever except until now, because well, it's been about 10 years and it's bothered me this whole time. Do you guys have any ideas as to what this could have It was the 3rd day of February 2012 in the Brazilian state of Rio Grande, and this is something I'll never forget. So my sisters, my mother and me went to have some fun at the beach pretty far from our home. Our mother had rented the house of a friend for a few days, which we used while going to and coming back from the beach. It was one of those very dirty sort of beach places where trash was dumped all around and not that many people were going to it. But for us it was a pretty fun getaway. I even remember joking to my sister that there are probably sharks in this beach. It was a hot day too, and I have the skin of a vampire, so after the first day on the beach I was looking like Mr. Krabs. And I had to stay in that house while they went to have some fun, which for me was totally okay. I'm kind of introverted. Anyway, now one day my mother and my sister, except for my youngest one, had all gone to go to some specific place. One went to color their nails, the other went to have a massage, two decided to go back to the beach, and my mom was going to go to a club with her friends because she was a boomer or whatever. But my younger sister went to sleep, and basically it was just me in this 2-floor house, which was way bigger than the home that I was raised in. But the place was kind of creepy, I guess, and it didn't help that the moon that day was full. I was young and stupid kid, I guess you could say, who was scared to death by creepy nights and also full of energy. So I jumped over the fence of our house by climbing over it. My thoughts at the time were pretty stupid, but I was going to look for my mom. I did that without thinking about stuff like, the possibility of me getting kidnapped or killed by some robber or whatever. This is Brazil, after all. Street crime is high, really high here. Anyway, I walked a little bit around the town, but then I realized that I was lost. I was utterly overwhelmed by the same modern buildings, and I had no idea as to where I was. I also had no idea of where my mom was. I knew the name of the place where she went, but I didn't know how to get there or exactly where that was. After the fear of being lost fully took over, I decided to give up and just go back to the house, but I didn't know where the house was at this point, so I just sort of walked around. There were very few people around that night, and I was way too anxious to ask anyone I saw for help or directions. Eventually, though, the road mixed with this path of dirt. It sort of looked like the path in front of the house that we were staying at, so I thought that I was in the right direction since I took another path after getting out of the house. But there were several others which this path could lead to, so I walked and walked, and eventually I found a beach. Not the beach where I went with my sisters, but a different one. But little me did not know that, so I ran into the beach because I thought that I could find two of my sisters there and they could bring me back home. Obviously they were not at the beach, but something else was. Now this beach had these rocks leading up to outside the water, those sort of spiked rocks that normally sink ships, those ones, and one of them was all the way into the sand, and I kept seeing something moving beside it from the corner of my vision, so I just sort of stood there and looked at the rock for a bit. Then something came out from beside the rock. This thing, it seemed to be about the size of a fully grown man, but it stood straight. It had legs and feet, but whatever it was, it definitely wasn't human, and the biggest proof was the left arm that I saw. So centipedes, right? Those black things with 1,000 legs. Well, this left arm was exactly like that. The thing extended to the ground and it moved like it had a life of its own. I could see all of the legs moving on it too. The whole body of this thing was weird, and not just the center beat arm. That green guy from Nightmare Before Christmas? Well, this man was kind of like that, but made of skin and with an egg-shaped head. I don't know what the man did after he saw me, because after seeing him in the clear moonlight with the ocean backdrop, my child self was absolutely terrified, and I just straight up bolted away from there. I ran away as far and as fast as I could from that beach, never looking back. Eventually, too well run on this dirt path, one of my sisters, thank the Lord, found me. It looks like they were looking for me for a while, and once we got back to the house I got scolded real bad by my mother, who was angry as anything with me for running away. She thought that I was kidnapped or something like that and was about to call authorities. I did tell this story to my sisters. Obviously they found it to be unbelievable. In fact, the only one that believes is the youngest, but she also believes in all that witchcraft stuff, so I guess her belief is sort of already wonky. To be clear with you guys, though, I don't believe in the supernatural stuff like werewolves, Bigfoot, greys, and all that stuff. I think of all of it as just conspiracy theories and stupid beliefs based on zero proof. But to this day I really do believe that that man thing was real. I actually saw it. I wasn't hallucinating. It was there, and it was as real as I was. The memory, it's still very vivid in my mind, and again I have no idea what it was, but it was real. I saw it and I'll never forget it. I wouldn't call myself a complete believer of the paranormal, but I'm not someone who writes it off completely either. I'm a skeptic, I guess you could say, that's open and willing to believe if given proof. I have family that is deeply involved with this type of stuff, though, and has their own experiences with the paranormal. I've got a few things that happened to me that I can't entirely explain normally. However, the one that I'm about to describe is by far the one that has no type of logic that can dunk it, at least to my knowledge. So far now, to better understand my experience, you have to understand the layout of my bathroom for it, because it Happened in the shower on my second floor. There's 4 rooms counting the bathroom. You walk up the stairs and you'll see 1 room straight across from the base of the stairs, while 2 rooms they follow the wall on the right to said room, finishing with a room mirroring the one at the base of the stairs once you went to the bathroom. Immediately to the right is my sink and mirror. The sink is about maybe 4ish ft. Off the ground next to the sink is my bath or shower, blocked by a wall so it doesn't connect to my sink. Straight across from the door is the toilet, and I had my door closed. No one else in the bathroom nor any pets, since my shower is also a bathtub. There's a ledge where me and my family members will keep shampoos, body washers, etc., etc., etc. And I began to wash my hair. Placed the shampoo on the ledge. As I go to put it down, I placed it a bit too close to the edge and it fell off. I heard the bottle roll around a bit and ultimately come to a stop. I think, oh well, I'll just grab it. When I get out, I begin to finish up in the shower, get out to grab my towel, blah blah blah. I look on the ground to find the shampoo bottle, but I can't. I sort of look around for a little while, and after a few seconds of searching I look up to see the bottle sitting perfectly on the sink. Again, the sink is about 4 feet off the ground and it's away from the shower altogether. I heard it rolling on the ground, and there's a wall separating my bath and sink. I have asked my family members if they did it or someone was just messing with me, but to this day no one has claimed to have done it, and to be honest, I think I would have heard someone or seen them perhaps if they had come in. So does anyone here have any form of explanation for this? I'm still scratching my head over it and it really freaks me out. So this story takes place close to 20 years ago. At this point I was spending a lot of time with my friends Danny and Kate. We were all sitting on Denny's couch watching TV. One day Denny says, I'm bored and let's do something. As we suggest things, I say, hey, have you guys ever heard of the smelter? For background, this all takes place in Arizona, Prescott to be exact, and the smelter is located in Humboldt, Arizona. It is very old, late 1800s I think. It used to process metals, I should say, but we start driving out there smoking cigarettes and listening to music. We arrive and I start telling them how we hung out here every weekend in junior high. My best friend at the time, Mike, lived in Hanel, so we would take girls to the smelter and just drink usual kid stuff. Nothing even remotely weird ever happened back then, so I guess that's why I was totally unprepared for what was going to unfold. We approached the outside of the smokestack and I noticed that the stairs had finally been ripped down. I guess whoever owned the property was sick of punk kids entering. I say, I guess someone finally took the stairs out. I then explain the holes every couple of feet in the catwalk, how they must have used the holes to shovel the ash. Giving up on entering, we moved to the side, and after what I'm about to tell you, I'm glad that we couldn't get, and I mean someone definitely would have been hurt. So we're outside for about 15 minutes being loud and just joking around. Then it suddenly got really quiet and still, and thousands of bats came screeching out of the windows of the smelter. I mean an absolutely ridiculous amount of them. I say to them, we've been standing out here making noise for close to 20 minutes. We didn't scare those bats. And right when I said that, we heard a sort of loud thud hit the ground like something heavy fell down a porthole. And then silence. Our eyes widened. Nobody said anything, and another thud, then one more. And to this day I will never be able to explain this next bit. We started hearing the loudest screeches like ever. Dust started flying up like a bird was dying on the ground. But nothing was there. They circled us, getting closer, and all we could really do was huddle closer together. It was like we forgot that we could run, I guess, but I forgot who ran first. I kind of remember being out of it but not thinking correctly, I guess. But anyways, we ran, and the first thing Denny said was if someone told me that story I would never believe them. We eventually ran back and we just got out of there anyways. If anyone has any leads, the rumor is that a girl was apparently killed here, but I could never confirm that. I always thought that it was an urban legend, but after this happened there's something wrong with that place, and I don't know what it is. Music. When I was 13 or 14, I'm 20 now, I used to go to Park It Open Gym. Basically I went there for a few days, saw a girl there almost my age for several days. Then one day I just gathered courage and I asked her about directions. Just an excuse to talk with her. Then we started talking. Then eventually we kind of became friends. I don't even remember a bit what we talked about besides the direction question. The only weird thing is that no one ever used to look at her. Besides me, she only ever talked to me. She didn't used to go to school either. Not like I have a weak memory about anything too, but it just isn't there. Then she asked me to go for a walk. I went behind her and we started running or racing. Then she stopped me in the middle of the race and said, let's not go there, weird goose, sit there, which was true. A part of that park is filled with people who do drugs and alcohol and stuff, but I told her it's fine to come with me, and we did, and no one stopped us. We started running in circles on that park, and then the next day I came again and she was there doing some exercise on that open gym. I went near her and said hi. Then we started talking about something which I really can't think of again, but she used to like talking with me, so she was showing some interest. Eventually I had a mobile phone. I handed her paper with my number and she took it. Then we again went for that run and said bye to each other and went back home. The thing that happened here though, is that she called me the next day at exactly 12:02 a.m. and said that she wanted to see me and asked to come out. Then I had to cut the call because my mom asked who's there. I told her that it was the wrong number and I went to sleep. Obviously I wasn't allowed to go outside around that time, but then the next day I gathered some courage again and called that number back during the afternoon, the exact same number. I told her that someone called me a girl and they said that he owns the number and doesn't have any daughter. In fact, he didn't even live close to that area because I asked him. Then I went to the park for more than a week and it was regularly around that time that she was always there, but I never saw her again. No one talked about her too, and she never told me her house, nothing. She sort of just disappeared. Was she grounded by her parents, or did I just experience something weird? I'm not too sure, but what I do have is a recording of me walking, but I thought that she was there, but in the recording there's no one. So I guess my question is, did I hallucinate this? Am I going crazy? But I still have her number, or the number at least that I called back that I swore that she spoke to me on. I don't know, the whole thing freaks me out, and to be honest with you, I just want to forget about it. Music. I was about 16 years old and I lived with my family in Phoenix, Arizona. The family at the time consisted of me, my two younger brothers, my mom, and my stepdad, so it was late at night or early in the morning. I guess you could say I had gotten out of bed upstairs since we had a two-story house, and I went downstairs to get some food. Eventually my middle brother, who would have been about 13, came to down too. We ultimately decided to watch some TV in the living room, so we stayed downstairs. I needed to use the restroom, so I excused myself and went to the half bath in the hall leading to our garage and laundry. My stepdad, he came downstairs and he told my brother to go to bed. Before sounding confused who was in this bathroom, he asked I answered. From what my brother told me, he took a step back in shock. I then heard him say, "I saw you upstairs. You stood outside your room when I left mine," stared at me, and then walked into your room. Eventually we all left the living room and returned to our rooms. Terrified, we had also been finding handprints at the time next to my baby brother's room, so maybe the thing that pretended to be me was also peeking into my brother's room occasionally. But the way the handprints were, it seemed like they stood in front of my room and peeked into the baby's room. I cannot be completely sure about that, but we definitely saw the handprints, and we have no idea how they got there. This happened close to 12 years ago when I was about 16 years old in North Las Vegas. To this date, I've never had such a thing happen to me again, but it's a moment that I will never forget, and I figured that I'd share it with all of you guys who might be interested. I would like to add that I'm somewhat of a healthy skeptic, I guess you could say, and not really religious, though I am open to the idea of higher powers and anomalies and all that. Now my older brother and I were at a house party, and when the time came for my brother to leave, I insisted on staying, knowing that I would have to walk home eventually since he was my ride. Mind you, we didn't live very far, maybe a mile or two at most. Fast forward to me leaving though, and I was on my way walking home. I had a nice buzz, but I definitely wasn't impaired to the point of having my vision or motor functions affected in any way that I can't blame this on. I know the whole 3 a.m. thing is super cliche, but it definitely was around that time frame, so I'm going to go ahead and say that when I started walking home, it was probably around 2ish. The streets were wide and almost no cars to be seen. I know as a woman it's different, but as a guy I actually took comfort in car passing at this time, because for that small window I felt like I wasn't alone walking when they were passing, if that makes sense. Anyway, the journey was eerie, but I made it to the entrance of my neighborhood. Unfortunately, my house was basically at the opposite end of this winding road, yet still a straight shot, so I had just a little ways to go at this point. Nonetheless, I knew these streets and safety was definitely on the horizon. The houses are fairly sized, I guess you could say, and as I'm walking down the sidewalk between each house, there's basically an alleyway of darkness. In the day it would be a walking path perhaps to the backyards with electric meters on the walls of the houses and AC units and all that, but at night these alleys are pretty much pitch black when you look far enough. Now as I'm walking down the sidewalk, I can't help but glare in between each house and start getting in my head and tripping myself out from my imagination. I try to slow down my roll mentally since I'm alone and stay on route no cars have passed in a while. Thus no comfort. I continue like this down the street until my house is finally in sight. Down the way, obviously I felt a little bit better with my destination now in view. Then a car comes north from the direction of my house, and I'm on the right-hand sidewalk with the road to my left, so I thought, sweet, another human to see me home, be it for just a moment. It was then when this car passed me, and after the flash of the lights that I saw what I saw already looking towards the street after the car passed on my left. Something grabbed my attention in the corner of my eye crossing the street towards me. The street lights were those yellowish ones, so the street was lit just enough for me to see it, and at first honestly I thought it was a dog, so I glanced directly at it, and what I saw initially, if I had to describe it, was what almost seemed to be a black silhouette of a little boy trotting Towards me. I don't know if you've ever seen those typical little statues of toddlers. Like in a garden section of a store, curly hair and all in a swing or whatnot, but if I had to describe the black silhouette, it resembled that of a little boy. I guess I'm an avid gamer, so I guess I would assume that I know when to lock it. But when this thing caught my eye with a raised brow after the car passed, it was when I did a double take to confirm what I had just seen, and I completely lost it. I remembered directly towards it after the glare of the headlights, after any factor that I could have blamed it on past for, but just a second or two enough for me to analyze it, and there was a shadowy little boy trotting towards me with no features, around 2.5, maybe 3 feet tall. The moment, and I mean the moment, that I consciously accepted that this was happening, I literally gasped, already turning my body, and yelled as I took off full sprint towards my house. I kid you not two, it felt like I was passing a house every 2 strides. Never ran so quickly in my life, and as I'm running, trying to collect myself, I literally reminded myself of what had just happened, and it was like I put on the turbos. I genuinely felt like it was right behind me. Up until this point I was already running as fast as I could, but my survival instinct said otherwise. I never looked back once, and I ran all the way to my house. And thank God that they left the front door open for me. I literally slammed the door behind me, and there was my dad and brother still awake, reclined and watching TV. I'll be 29 this August, but I remember this night vividly, and it still gives me chills when I recall this moment. I've never really shared this with, well, pretty much anyone, and you're free to believe it or not if you want. Regardless, it's still somewhat of a relief that I can finally get this off my chest. I appreciate you if you've taken the time to hear this out, and I would be happy to answer any questions in the comments below if you have any, and if anyone who has listened to this has any ideas as to what this is, then please do share it, because I would really like to. So growing up, there was this little red shack in the woods behind my friend's house, about a mile down from my childhood home. It was really small, like the size of a garden tool shed or an ooze. Maybe the neighborhood kids, they would tell my brother and I that there was a strange hermit who lived there who ate snakes and skunks, and we thought that they were just being kids telling scary stories. Well, just recently at Easter dinner, I was telling my parents about the hermit guy story that my boyfriend and I went to look for this shack again and couldn't find it. I thought that maybe I'd imagined seeing it as a kid, but apparently it was real, and my parents, they knew this guy. He used to be well known and respected in the community and was very successful at one point, until something happened. My dad said that one time while my dad was slowly driving around the potholes on our road, this man ran out of the woods and jumped into the bed of his truck and ducked down, and my dad really didn't know what to do, so he just kept driving. After a few miles down the road, the man jumped out of the bed of the truck and went, well, wherever he went. This was how he got around town, apparently forced hitchhiking or whatever, and did this to people a lot. Then my mom said that when she worked at the grocery store many years ago, he would come in and buy raw hamburger and a bag of sugar, sit outside of the store, mix it together and eat. There are a few other things that they said that I forgot, but what had happened was this guy's mother died. Apparently he found her and couldn't accept her death, so he had kept her body in the house for a few months. It deeply affected his mental health seeing her body decay like that, and he went from very successful to living in a shack in the woods. As far as I know, he wasn't violent or dangerous, just very unpredictable and unstable in a sort of non-dangerous way. I guess he eventually ended up in a care home where he passed away within the last couple of years. I do hope that this hermit guy ended up in heaven. I heard that he was a really nice guy before his life went downhill, and while his behavior was very unsettling, I don't think he ever hurt anybody and didn't deserve to have the second half of his life end the way that it did. One thing that I question now, though, is, are the stories that those kids were telling, are they music? True, this encounter happened about 12 years ago now, but it still makes me feel incredibly uneasy. At the time I lived in our family home with my parents and 2 brothers. I had a lot of very strange and unexplainable things happen in this house, but this was by far the strangest. The house, it was a 3-story, and the attic had been converted into my brother's bedroom. I came out of the bathroom on the 2nd floor to see a figure sort of rush past and run up the stairs to the attic. On the way, we had some boxes stacked up that had been knocked over in the rush. I walked straight to the boxes to stack them back up again, and as I did, I looked up the attic stairs to find someone stood there. The staircase was dark, but I could clearly see one of my brothers stood a few steps up there. At the time, my brothers looked very similar, same hairstyle, same build, same height. Even so, it was really hard to determine which one of them that it was, but for a few seconds we just sort of stood there and stared at each other in silence. But before my eyes could adjust to the dark to see who it was, he ran further up the stairs and into the bedroom. I heard his feet hitting the ground all the way upstairs, which made me feel uneasy as they didn't sound familiar. I guess my brothers both have very heavy, distinct footsteps, so I could always tell who was coming before even seeing them. I didn't really question what had happened, but something just didn't really feel right. I guess I had this chill running through me and a sinking feeling in my stomach. In any case, I made my way downstairs, and all I could think of was which one of them is wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt today, as that is distinctively what I saw him wearing. I got downstairs and peered into the kitchen, and when I did, my stomach completely dropped because our entire household was in the kitchen. Both of my brothers were there, both wearing shorts and colorful t-shirts. There was nobody else in the house too, so who the heck was that? It's not just the fact that I saw someone, but I heard them too. I can't describe it, but I literally felt their presence. And why did it look like my siblings? Why did it stop to stare at me and then just run away like that? Did it want me to follow it? And what would have happened if music did so? There were these two guys that came into my work not long ago. It was normal really until my coworker pointed out that the two eyes were staring at me very intensely. They were non-stop staring and even turning their heads to stare at me. They were not hiding it at all, is what I'm getting at, and the stare was very predatory-like and made me extremely uncomfortable. It was like they were watching my every move. Every time I would look in their direction, they would still be staring. For context too, I work at a restaurant and we have bottomless drinks. They ordered food and had eaten it but kept on refilling their drinks, staying at the table for at least 4 hours, which is highly unusual as customers will typically spend 45 minutes on average or less there, as we're sort of like a fast food restaurant. I guess one guy was on his computer though, and the other was on his phone sometimes, but the majority of the time they were both just staring at me. They were barely talking to each other and were almost silent. One of the guys left at some point, but the other was still waiting there until I had to clock out. The guy also asked me a few questions when he asked me for ice cream, that being where I'm from, because apparently I looked foreign to him, and asking if I came from Spain. It was pretty unusual to say the least, but when I left the restaurant and I turned around, the guy was right behind me, so I panicked and sort of stopped. The guy walked past me and I walked in the opposite direction, calling my mom, and thankfully I got home safe. I am nervous about this though, and I'm feeling very uncomfortable, and although nothing really happened, I guess I'm worried that this isn't the end of this. My gut feeling is telling me that they had bad intentions, and so my question for all of you guys is, well, what should I music do? I was up at 3:50 a.m. this morning on my phone, and I decided to put it down and go to sleep eventually, but not even 5 minutes later I hear sort of shuffling upstairs outside of my door, and for some reason I decided to grab my knife because it was a little bit too weird at this time. Laying in my bed, my door slow as wide open super quietly, and I ask what's up, thinking it was my roommate, and he replies, oh, nothing. I couldn't tell you if I'd heard that voice anywhere ever, but all I saw was a hooded black figure. He then slowly cracks my door back, but he doesn't close it, so I'm freaking out. I shoot up out of bed to open it, and when I do, he's gone. I cleared the upstairs and saw that our front door was open still. When I went downstairs, the only other roommate who didn't lock this door was wide open, but he closed it before he went to sleep too. Mind you, nothing was stolen, and why he would be coming in our house and stealing nothing, I have no idea. Thank God nothing happened, but it just doesn't make much sense. About a month ago, I'm assuming that the same person opened our front door and then took off after seeing us awake. The doors, they will be overly locked from now on for sure, but I don't know, something tells me that this isn't over, and that whoever this is, that there'll be music back. This was about 5 years ago, and it still creeps me out. I'm a female and was 18 at the time. I'm now 23, and I was walking home from work at the local pizza joint and took my usual route home. It was about 9:45 to 10:15 p.m. and it was super dark that night. As I'm getting about 100 yards away from the street that I live on, a white van turns onto the street suddenly. Nothing too suspicious, but something just didn't sit right with me, so I yanked out my earbuds and paused my music. I then turned down my street, and as I'm getting closer to my house, I started getting a weird gut feeling. I look up from my phone as I was about to text my roommate, who was out of town at the time, that I was almost home, about 15 yards or so at this point, and as I look up, I notice the white van sitting in front of my house, and the man inside is just sort of staring at me, the yellow car light shining on his face. He had brown hair, glasses, and facial hair. His van lights, they were off, but his car was running. I STO and put my back to a tree in my neighbor's yard and just sort of stood there maintaining eye contact with this man. After what must have been about 5 minutes, he starts driving towards the stop sign at the end of the road. I didn't turn my back to him at any point. I kept my back to the tree and maintained visual on the van the entire time until it stopped at the stop sign. Mine, he just sat there for another 2 or 3 minutes, seemingly looking in his rearview mirror at me, all the while I'm not looking away and my back is still on the tree. Finally, though, he turned right the direction in which I had come from, and after about 20 seconds of making sure that he or anybody else wasn't coming, I bolt to my house. Instantly, I quickly get inside and lock the door. I go to the window and very quietly look through the blinds. I didn't turn on any lights because, well, I'm not that stupid, and after a few seconds of looking, what do you know, he drove back up and down the street again, and then Left afterwards I texted my roommate what had happened and then went to each and every one of the windows in my house. To make sure that they were locked along with the back door and the garage door too, I made sure to keep all the lights off for the remainder of the night. I didn't sleep a lick that night at all. I was so paranoid at every sound or movement, and after that I never did walk home ever again. So I'm going to start this by saying that I always had a weird feeling in certain rooms of the house that I live in. It feels like goosebumps, I guess, but only concentrated on one point of my body. I really never thought much about it before. I kind of just thought that I was just cold even in summer in the blazing heat, which is weird, I know, but that quickly changed when I changed rooms with my parents, who for some reason really wanted to move out of their room in our house. So it all started when I was 16 years old. I started to feel like I was getting watched while playing video games, to the point where I had to turn around and take a look, seeing nothing but the darkness of my room. I didn't think much of it, but then my dog started acting weird, barking towards my doors and growling when they were open. Also nothing, and I mean nothing, could get this dog in the rooms. 2 weeks after my dog started acting like this, doors would just randomly be wide open at a 90 degrees angle. I obviously took pictures to be 100% sure that I'd closed them, but they were wide open every single time. I rarely open my window, and there is little to no airflow in my room strong enough to open these doors. 2 after that door started slamming and reopening in front of me. It all got worse too when after a few months objects started falling off of my desk and on my shelves and all that, and friends of mine started having panic attacks in my room. I would hear footsteps outside and inside of my room at night, and often had the feeling like somebody was sitting on my bed. Thankfully I'm not the only person who experienced those things in my room. In fact, I have witnesses for most of the said things, but still to this very day, sometimes whatever it is, it comes back to show me that it is still there. Music. I had first moved to Portland from Indianapolis in November of 2022, and this instance happened late winter, early spring of 2023. At the time I was living with my aunt, and it was around 1 in the morning. Everybody was in bed, and I was in the living room playing the new Hogwarts Legacy game, all lights turned off except for the cast of the TV, when all of a sudden I just get a violent chill up my spine and every hair on my body stands straight up. I immediately break into a cold sweat, and I imagine that this is what pray feels like when something was locked on my eyes. Immediately go towards the dark kitchen hallway, and I swear to you that I see long dark fingers wrap around the corner, and my breathing stops as I'm watching this happen in sort of slow motion. I know what happens next, and I see the head pop around the corner shortly after. I make out the hand, and I am staring into just a completely black face of darkness, and I know it's staring right back at me, but as soon as it looked around the corner, it went back around, never to be seen again. I'm shaking at this point, but feeling like it was looking for someone specific and not finding them, like I wasn't who they were hoping to encounter. I really don't know, and granted at this time I was living with people who unfortunately stayed within stagnant negative energy, and I cleansed myself as much as possible and tried not to engage in their constant stuff. But this isn't the first time that I've seen shadow people, but this is the first time that I've looked one in the face like that, and I absolutely do not recommend. So around 2007 to 2008, placing me around 5 years old, possibly 6, I was still in one of those transforming cribs with a portion that could drop down and turn it into a toddler bed. This left the bed rather high off the floor, and at the time I lived in southern Arizona. Now, late in the night or very early stages of the morning, one night at around midnight to 3 o'clock, I was awoken by something grabbing at my ankle, feeling long sharp nails sort of digging in like stiletto-style nails. From the now fragmented memories I still have of the night, that this thing looked like a stereotypical witch-wrinkled, water-riddled face with a long nose and rotting teeth. It never spoke, but it did manage to pull me off the bed and under it. It startled me, understandably so, right, and it put a single finger up to its lips in the shushing motion. It never changed and simply vanished from the sight as the sun began to rise, and I guess I was just so freaked out that I never spoke about it. Although my parents did find me under the bed in the morning, it wasn't some weird dream based on a memory, as at the time I wasn't a huge fan of any media with witches. It was a pretty hard set Lilo and Stitch kit already, plus when I got up in the morning my parents also noticed that I had like digging and marks in my skin where this witch had grabbed me. So I've had many encounters throughout my life. Living by a graveyard, literally right on the other side of the property line is a graveyard. We've had spirits come in all the time, and once I watched them touch one of my dogs when the dog wasn't expecting it. Freaking out, I saw a shadow, and then I told them to get out of here, to be respectful of the dogs. I've also been seeing apparitions around the house lately and feeling certain energies, I guess, but nothing dangerous. But we do have something that loves the dogs and also is a bit of a prankster. Well, tonight I get home from the bar a lot earlier than usual. I go grab my pup to get her into the room. She Usually goes right for the bed, and sometimes I'll grab some water or some sort of snack or whatever I went to go and get a drink, and that was when I heard her growl. I felt someone in here when I got in, but I figured they'd get the hint to leave us because I don't give the most welcoming presence, I guess you could say. But my poor pup was so scared of this thing that they busted a window out of my hallway door and ran into the back room. Now she knows she's in trouble for the window, and I know she scared herself a bit with that, but she was too scared to go back into that room, and I have never heard her growl like that either. And so what type of protections can we put up around the yard to ward off any of these spirits? My family is Catholic. I'm a recovering Catholic, aka non-practicing, so they do their stuff, but I genuinely think that we need more. I don't want these things on my property scaring everything, as especially the animals. Every single animal that we have is a rescue one and has come out of some pretty rough situations, and we're trying to lessen the stress, not make it music worse. So for some context, it was about 9:10 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time in regional Australia, and I was sitting on a tire swing at a Matt's house just looking down at the phone when I put it down to see a shadowy figure that looked 3D until a normal shadow sitting next to my friend's neighbor's car in their carport shelter. They were about twice the height of the car and completely pitch black. They had sort of Arby's mitten man sort of hands with two big fat arms and a skinny body. The head looked very round on the top and slim down at the mouth. The lights they turned off, and I instantly went into fight or flight mode and ran back to their patio where I was completely out of breath and just sort of rattled down to my core. I tried telling people, and they say that no one was there and that you were imagining it. Mind you, I am mentally stable with no noticeable symptoms of anything in the schizophrenic disorders umbrella and take no medication that led to hallucinations or anything. I'm an Aboriginal man, and shadow people in our culture are evil spirits who have come to kill you, because in the past it goes that they had fights with their ancestors and they see you as the person to carry out all this legacy stuff on, so they try to harm you. I still don't know what it was, to be honest, and it was just well plain scary to see. Music, I moved in with my sister and her ex in a little renovated garage unit made into a living room or kitchen area, a one bed and bath in Berea, Kentucky. She told me that it was haunted because she would hear footsteps and noises coming from the living room when no one was home but her. From the get-go to that place felt just off. I guess everyone always got the heavy feeling of being watched everywhere else but the bedroom, that is including the bathroom. One day too, I told Henry that we didn't like when he stared at us, especially in the shower, and not to be a perv, they only used the bedroom and the facilities when necessary, so there was no furniture in the living room. So when the neighbor gave me a couple of wooden chairs, I brought them over to the house. My sister, she didn't want them there, but I still just sort of sat them against the wall and went about my day. All the next time that I went into the living room, one of the chairs had been moved to the middle of the floor underneath the ceiling fan. I asked if anyone had moved it, and she mouthed off, "I don't even want them here. Why would I fool with them?" So I just placed them back against the wall, and the next time that I went in there, it happened again. Now we had heard rumors about a man hanging himself in there, and I suppose that just about sums it up, right? Also one night my sister had her friend Matilda over, and we were all sitting on the bed in a triangle. Her friend and I were at the foot of the bed. We were just talking when I saw a quarter-sized black orb float from in front of the wall up over the top of the blinds and then disappear. The blinds were closed and it was nighttime, so it wasn't a headlight or anything. I stopped talking and said I just saw something, and Matilda said that she saw it too and elaborated exactly what I had just seen. We also always had bad dreams there as well, and it was a weird place. On another occasion I was spending the night with my friend Raspberry at her brother Michael's house. Their other brother Spalding, her boyfriend Barney, and two cats were also there. It was around 11 p.m. when she broke out her glow-in-the-dark Ouija board with the light-up planchette, and we all head up to the upstairs to the closet, including the cats, leaving no one or nothing to debunk our experience that I'm about to tell you about. But we were all very serious about playing it and wouldn't have goofed off at all. So we sit down, light a few candles, and we begin asking if there's anyone there who would like to speak to us. We get a yes and all look at each other. We plan on asking random questions, and I remember the last question being, "Are you in the house?" "No," it reads. Then immediately after that we hear a really loud bang downstairs. We sort of say bye, but I admit that it wasn't the best one. But we pushed the planet to goodbye and burst out of the closet and down the stairs to find that the pan that we had used to make biscuits earlier and obviously left out on the top of the stove had been completely thrown across the room. Now sitting in the living room of all places, safe to say our adrenaline was pumping for a while that night, because that was seriously one of the most incredible things that I had ever seen. Later that night too, it was just Michael and I playing another round on the Ouija board, and we asked the spirit, "Are you human?" and it said no, and that was when the scratching on the closet door began, then banging and scratching as if something was desperately trying to get in. Like I said, we were all very serious about it and wouldn't have messed around. Besides, someone always fesses up to it. At some point when they do play a prank like that, but in this case no one ever did. We left the closet to find rather deep claw marks on it too, and that was the last time that I ever played on a Ouija board. This morning I woke up as I normally did at around 6 a.m. Picked up my phone and started messaging my friends, and I was watching some videos as I normally did. Around 10 minutes in my peripheral vision I then see a woman walk through my doorway. At first I didn't be an eye, I thought it was just my brain playing tricks on me, so I looked to its direction, and when I did my heart dropped to my stomach. It didn't disappear, it was a woman, not a shadow figure, but a woman who I didn't recognize, who was very tall. Around 50 years old as it looked, had long ginger curly hair, whose head was tilted sort of slightly, and who was just staring emotionlessly at me. I stared in utter paralyzing fear for what must have been around 3 seconds before I blinked and she was gone. At that point I was frozen in bed and my phone dropped on the floor for a solid minute before I sort of finally snapped out of it and threw my duvet off and sprinted down the stairs to wake up my parents like an 8-year-old. At that point I was on the border of bursting in tears. My parents said that I was just tired and they told me to go back upstairs. It was only later that morning that they actually took me seriously. It's also important to mention that at that time I was not tired and was for sure not dreaming or daydreaming or anything. So are there any possible explanations for this? Am I going crazy? Please do let me know so that I can stop thinking about this, as I'm pretty shaken up. Also, after some research I did discover that the previous owner of this home had passed away at the age of 67, and it turns out that the woman was quite tall, had long ginger curly hair, and stayed in this home for 24 years. The images that I saw of this woman, they pretty much matched perfectly with what I remember seeing. What really creeps me out though about this is that what I saw was a full human, not any sort of ghostly or shadowy figure. It was probably the woman's lost spirit or whatever walking around the home, but I actually saw her, a full body apparition like that. It's terrifying to go through something like this, and if you have any advice as to what I can do about it, then please do let me know. So in 2019 my brother, my best friend, and I were riding our bicycles across the United States to raise money for a cancer charity. Because we were doing this, it meant that we were camping every single night, most often in town parks or campgrounds if they have them. This particular night, in the middle of the trip, we arrived in Napoleon, North Dakota, literally the definition of the middle of nowhere. The evening was entirely normal until just after the sun went down. As I was laying in my sleeping bag under a pavilion in this town's only park, I could hear the faint noise of like radio static, almost like someone was flipping through channels or something, picking up bits and pieces of songs and commercials. On the radio the sound grew louder and louder until it was undeniable, and all that my brother and I could hear, because we had just finished biking 70 miles that day and had 60 more tomorrow. I was pretty angry and wanted my sleep, so I left the pavilion to go yell at some loud other camper, and as soon as I got up I noticed two things. When I looked at my phone for the time, and I noticed that it was around 1:30 in the morning now, which just wasn't possible because I don't even recall falling asleep, and it felt like I literally just got back from dinner at around 8:30. And two, the campsite downtown was totally and completely empty. In fact, the town was dead by this time. I got a little bit weirded out but decided to continue investigating. I continued following the static, and it led me to multiple places around Napoleon. First it took me to the water tower, then the main street, and finally it was leading me out into this large cornfield on the edge of town. I then realized that this sound was almost shifting in the wind, coming from different places. Just moments after it came from one direction, I decided not to follow it into the field because to heck with that, right, and went back to my sleeping bag to get some sleep. But the most concerning part happened just then. You see, I put in my earbuds to block out the static, and just then the volume of said static only increased. The noise seemed to be coming from inside of my head. I know that that sounds really weird to say, but that is honestly the best way to explain it. So after a restless night I woke up to a day of cycling 60 miles in a downpour, but my head thankfully was finally silent. I asked my brother if he heard the same thing, and he said that he did, but he just assumed that it was another camper. But again, the sight, and quite literally the entire town, was entirely empty. This is unrelated too, but that morning I received news that my childhood dog died, launching me into my first ever experience with grief. Probably unrelated, but it was a weird coincidence. This story is from around maybe 5 or 6 years ago when I was a teenager, but I still remember it very clearly. For some context, this was a wooded area near my hometown in the UK that had established bike paths, and people visited regularly, making it a decently known area, but it was still pretty large and had areas that no one would really go to. It all began when my friend and I cycled to the area to do some jumps, and generally just sort of right about when we spotted a swing on the top of a hill, and we decided that we wanted to go up to see it and use it. We did so and spent around maybe an hour or two just talking and swinging, and it began to get dark. My Friend took off as he had to be back earlier than me, and instead of leaving I sort of cycled around for a bit longer. I ended up cycling pretty deep into the woods until I was no longer on bike paths and instead barely visitable sort of dirt paths. I went up another pretty steep hill, and this is when it happened. Below me, maybe around 20 m or so near the bottom of the hill, stood a man wearing a black leather gas mask, some kind of military looking jacket, and holding a really long sort of thick torch in his hand. The torch it wasn't on, and he was just crouching down in my direction towards the hill, staring straight to the ground, and from what I could tell he wasn't doing anything at all. But then he looked up at me. I couldn't make out if he was staring directly towards me, but the cold black voids of the mask's eye sockets really terrified me. I immediately nearly soiled myself, and I leapt onto my bike. As I did, I heard a heavy and rough fast breathing getting louder, and I rode as fast as I could for about 10 seconds before quickly looking back. He was stood still at the top of the hill, no longer chasing me but just staring at me with the same cold black eyes. I never did tell anyone what happened, not even any of my friends, and still now, even driving past that place, it sends chills down my spine. I'm really glad that I had my bike with me that day, because to be quite honest, if I didn't, I think he probably would have caught me, and if he had, I shudder to think about what might have music happen. I'm sitting in bed with a flashlight on at the moment, writing this at midnight because I'm just too scared to go back to bed. Let me preface this by saying that I live in a house that had been poorly abused before we moved, and I don't ever want to shame anyone, but they were really odd possible addicts. There was freaky graffiti on the walls and a set of rules for the wife that was left unfinished, not to mention the holes, burns, and children's toys stuffed in the vents. We remodeled a lot of it though, but it'll never feel clean in this house again. I think when we first moved in, I just felt the most overwhelming sense of dread standing in the room that was very obviously a child's bedroom at some point before. Seriously, just bad vibes. I don't think anyone has died in there though, but still, for the first few months I was constantly waking up in the middle of the night, and one night my glasses were thrown clear across the room. At some point another night, every single figurine on my nightstand had been laid face down. I've woken up with bumps and bruises, but never anything too serious. Plus it all happened at night while I was asleep, so I never put too much into it. My parents don't believe in spirituality, so there's no way that they would let me smudge the place or anything like that, but they would always just tell me to get over it. But for the past few months or so, right as I'm about to fall asleep, I hear or feel something walking up to the side of my bed and trying to tug my blankets off of my bed. I sleep face down with my blankets pulled tightly over for this exact reason, and last night it was the strongest one that I'd ever felt, and I knew that it was coming before it happened. My face got hot and I just couldn't breathe, but something claimed down on my shoulder and started messing with my pillow right in front of me. I was terrified obviously, but I've gotten to the point where I'm not too afraid to reach over and turn my lamp on. In fact, it brings me a bit of comfort at least to have the light on like that. When I did, nothing was there and nothing has ever been there. I don't know if I'm hallucinating or if there's something wrong with me, but I want to clarify that I'm always 100% lucid in these moments. What I'm getting at is that it's not sleep paralysis or some weird sleep cycle stage or something. I don't know what it is, but has anyone else had this happen? And if you have, what did you do about it? I'm not a believer by any means, but I just had something really weird happen that I cannot explain. So I work from home. I was talking to my wife inside. I said I'm going to go take a lunch break and mow the lawn. She said okay, I'm going to go and take a shower. I fast forward 10 minutes. I'm mowing a patch of grass beneath our bedroom window, which is frosted over because it's in the shower. Looking out to the closed off backyard, I hear two raps on the glass and look up. There's a hand in the window waving at me behind the frosted glass. I assume my wife is in there showering, so I knock back the hand waves in response, and I wave at it. Maybe 30 seconds later she comes out from around the corner, clothed, because she was apparently at the mailbox. She's been messing around in the house, and she goes to the mailbox before getting into the shower these days. Anyway, but this is my master bathroom that only my wife and I use. One kid's away at her friends and the other was across the house in her room. I don't believe in ghosts and stuff like that, but I just do not have an explanation for what I just saw. So I live in a little farming community in Virginia, nothing out here but cotton and peanuts, and well, apparently ghosts. I knew that there was at least two in the store, but now apparently only one. Number one, he or she likes to knock things over, especially when we're talking about him or her. He or she also likes to appear as an orb in our security cameras from time to time. Number two, the one that I'm fairly sure isn't there anymore, was a kind of, I don't know, it's hard to find the word, but maybe like a spirit stuck in a cycle, so to speak. In any case, it was a dude in a black hoodie. Now I could easily say that it was just a trick of my eyes were it not for the fact that I saw him over and over again, or occasionally mistook him for a customer sometimes, or one of the two men that I work with. The first time that I realized that I was seeing something was when I saw this man walk from the Coke window to the beer window. I thought that it was my coworker James fronting the cooler windows only for James to come in from outside as he had been walking the trash out to the dumpster. I got kind of a cold pit in my stomach when I realized that the person that I saw was technically not. There are a few times I was shocked the customer had managed to get into the store without the doorbell ringing. Saying hello is required by the company only to check the security cameras beside my register and realized that the floor was completely empty, so I began to be more cognizant of what I was saying. The pattern sort of happens like this: the man starts at the sodas, walks to the single beer window and disappears. I started talking to him because my mouthy, and I said, "You can't drink that beer anymore, man, you're dead. And look, I know you can think that I'm crazy if you want, but my other coworker Sam has seen him too. I guess I saw him maybe about 15 to 20 times in total, but one day I saw him do something different. Instead of walking from the soda to the beer, he started at the beer window and started walking down the candy aisle toward the register and then disappeared. After that I never saw him again, so personally I hope that this means that whoever this guy was has finally found his way out of the store. I know it's probably weird to hear someone speak like this as if ghosts are real, but for us guys here at the station it was honestly just common knowledge. Whatever the case, rest in peace my dad, be a drinking friend. Back in 2020 I was living with my ex and we lived in a terrible apartment, but later that year he achieved his dream of being a homeowner and we began the process of moving into the house. Well, one night he came home from work and decided that he was done with the apartment and we should pack what we had left and just move into the new house. So we packed up our pets and the rest of our stuff and moved in, and this is where it gets a little creepy. You see, it was probably about 9 p.m. or so and my ex was inside the house setting up the internet, and I went out to the trunk of the car to get some stuff when I heard a woman screaming and calling a name. At first that I thought that she lost her dog or something, but as she got closer it sounded like a kid's name. Also she was frantic, and then she said the words, "Come to mommy," and that's when it hit me that she had perhaps lost her kid. As she finally got into my view I could see that she was a woman with blonde hair. She was carrying a lawn chair and she was crying and panicking. At this point I was making no attempt to conceal myself from the driveway and instead stared straight at her. I expected her to ask for help or something since her kid was lost, apparently, and I mean that's what I would do, but she didn't. She looked at me for a moment and kept walking down the street, still crying and calling his name. I ran inside and told my boyfriend what happened. Apparently he could hear from all the way inside and he called the police. The cops, they wasted no time in getting there, but still she walked pretty quickly, and by the time that we saw the cop car we didn't hear her anymore. I still don't know what happened after that, as it was a strange welcoming to my new home and it never did happen again. I'm still not sure if she really was missing a kid or I don't know, maybe she was just crazy or something, but her panic seems so genuine. What really creeps me out though is how she didn't ask for help and just walked past me like I wasn't there. I mean, if you lost your kid, wouldn't you be asking someone to call the police? At least something seemed really fishy about the whole situation. I do wish that I knew what happened. Hopefully she got her kid back though, or at least got the help that she needed. So this is about a kid that I went to school with. I'd known him since middle school and he'd always been a bit weird, but when high school started things just got worse. In middle school he was just kind of cringe, I guess, like stereotypical internet cringe sort of thing, you know what I mean, but by high school he became genuinely horrifying. I have a lot of mini stories about him, but I'm going to be focusing on one for this. It's not that long, but bear with me, and for the sake of this I'll call him Jay. This story took place in my freshman year, so every year at my school before our new year starts we have this back to school bash, which is just the kickoff football game with a chill little after party on the cafeteria patio where we all dance and drink soda and stuff. Pretty standard school organized party. My friends and I were having a pretty good time. We were sitting on a wall just drinking like Fender or something, I think. I don't remember, but this kid Jay for whatever reason thought that he was friends with me and my friends. I don't know why, but when I tell you that he trailed us at this party, I mean it. At one point he came up to my group as well. We saw him coming and all exchanged sort of annoyed and simultaneous terrified glances. He came over to me and my best friend, looked at us, paused for a minute, and then asked us, "I'm trying to get girls to come with me into the woods. Do you have anyone you'd recommend?" My friend and I just sort of froze at this. We were too shocked by what he had said to even respond. I mean, who asks that, right? Who says things like that? And what were his plans? I guess we'll never really know, but he never got anyone, thank God. As my friends and I dedicated the rest of the night to telling all the adults what he had said. Eventually I'm pretty sure that he got kicked out and had to have his mom pick him up again. Thank God for that. Last I heard he was still being very creepy and also drawing hate symbols on the walls of his new school, and that is a really ominous sign of something a lot worse that I really hope is not happen. So I'm 37, male from Ireland, and my wife is 35, female from Texas. I have an interest in horror movies and scary stories, I'll admit, but I've always been a skeptic. In reality, I Guess my wife had told me about experiencing paranormal encounters in her family home, which I just shrugged off, as I've slept in buildings and castles 1,000 years old and always experience nothing, so how could she experience such things in a 50-year-old home in America? Excuse my arrogant Europeanism, I was wrong. I assumed that she was just overly superstitious, as she is Hispanic, which, like the Irish, have a rich culture history of everything considered paranormal, ghosts, witches, demons, etc. But on the night in question, I'm in San Antonio, Texas, visiting my wife's family. I'm awake, laying on her bed, just staring through a doorway that leads to the living room area. It belongs to my wife. Her bedroom is like a sort of mini apartment. It's dark and around 4 in the morning when I see a sort of jet black cloud float along the floor in the living room. When I say black, I mean absolutely black. Almost like a bad Photoshop in a photograph. So here I am looking at this cloud as it suddenly starts to stretch from its right side into a sort of triangle shape until it couldn't stretch anymore, it seemed, and snapped back into itself and evaporates, leaving a head staring at me from the floor. The head is also jet black and is only visible from the neck up on the floor. I couldn't see its face, but I will always remember seeing the window light shining through its long curly hair. Obviously I am in disbelief at this. I wake my wife as I'm still making eye contact with the head on this floor. I must have seen it for 15 seconds straight before my wife looks up. I turn on the flashlight on my phone in the head's direction and it just disappeared. After the event, my wife told me that she used to sleep with a blanket wall stacked on the bed covering the view of the doorway that I was looking through. She said that she used to do it because she was afraid that she would always see something. She's experienced noises and heard the voices of people talking, yet never seen anything. But when we told her family, her mother and auntie said that they have seen super fast glimpses of a black head looking around the doorway of the kitchen and the dining room. I wasn't aware of this beforehand, so my description of the black head really dropped some jaws at the dinner table. Amazingly, I was not frightened. I was just absolutely shocked, to be honest, and almost thrilled that I now fully believe in ghosts and even the afterlife. I still don't believe in organized religion, but at least now I believe in something, right? I can't find information online regarding black shape-shifting cloud entities, but the cloud itself was blacker than black, with a sort of sharp rotating edge, almost like it contained I don't know, like a cyclone or a black hole, but it was so dark that you really couldn't see any definition inside of it almost. And I guess I'm wondering if anyone has experienced something similar, or if you have any ideas as to what I saw that night. There was a time in my childhood where a lot of strange things happened to me. During that time I used to have nightmares every night. Some of them were so disturbing that I woke up sweating and with my heart racing. One night when I was sleeping, I woke up because I felt a hand tickling me on my neck. The hand was cold, and it tickled my neck very quickly and hard, so when I woke up I still had the sensation in my neck skin. I thought that maybe it was just a dream, and I went back to sleep, but it didn't go away. The tickling started happening every night, and during the day sometimes I would ask my family if it was them pranking me, but none of them took me seriously, so it definitely wasn't them. A couple of days passed, and one night I realized that I had left my jacket at my neighbor's house, which was across a little park in front of my house. It was dark outside, but I didn't feel scared to go because it was like 5 minutes away, so I decided to go as quickly as I could. Everything was going all right until I started crossing the park, when suddenly I felt very uneasy. The place was extremely quiet and lonely, but I just felt like something dangerous was watching me, and that's when it happened. I heard what I can only describe as a deep long moan come from between the bushes, something like a sound a zombie would make. I turned around and looked into the bushes, and I will never forget what I saw. It was a tall, completely red man. He looked like he was covered in almost like bright red blood. I started screaming and I ran to my neighbor's house. They let me in and gave me a glass of water to calm me down. My heart was about to come out through my throat, and I was shaking so hard that it took me a while to calm down and tell them what happened. After that they took me home, and I told my family about what had happened, and they just told me that I must have imagined it. I couldn't cross that path park anymore from the fear that I felt from just looking at it. I had to cross it a few times after that happened, and I heard the noise again, just heard the noise. This time I never saw the man again, but no one ever seemed to hear it like I did just me one day, though. It just stopped happening all of a sudden, as well as the tickling and the nightmares. I still don't know if it was all just my imagination or not, but it was all pretty real to me at the time. That was clear. My mother lives in an apartment complex on the edge of the city, right where Parkerbug, West Virginia turns into Mineral Wells, West Virginia. The apartment complex is really on a dead end, but it's not quite near the dead end part. When I was living with her, I used to park my car on this concrete slab that was by the sign to the entrance because I could up Wi-Fi from this person's house. I'm usually a bit of a night owl, so this must have been at around maybe 2 o'clock in the morning. I had been sitting in my car for about an hour on my phone, and at this point I just kept feeling like I was seeing something like a shadow in my passenger side mirror and I couldn't shake the feeling like I was being watched. I will say that I'd always got a weird vibe from the woods around here. Even walking down the road was frightening for me because as I always felt this overwhelming anxiety. Sometimes it would be so bad that when I was walking once I made it to buy the sign to the entrance, I would always take off running until I just made it near the office to the apartment complex. But after I kept seeing a shadow from the mirror, I decided that I was going to turn my headlights on because since I was on my phone, my eyes weren't acclimated to the darkness. So once I put my phone down, I couldn't really see. I turned my headlights on though, and all I can say is that there was this tall thing standing near the edge of the woods, and it starts slowly backing up into the woods. At this point I hurried up and I started my car and I took off like nobody's business. I drove to the gas station and I just sat there and realized that there must have been at least two of these things because I know that there was something around my car watching me. Whatever it was tall, and I remember it looking gray. I can't really remember the face, and I mean it was a fair distance away, so my view wasn't really great, but I was so scared once I saw it that I just took off as quickly as I could, and I really didn't have time to focus on the face. To this day I don't ever walk down that road when it's dark, especially if I'm by myself. There's also been a couple of times when I would walk from my friend's house who lived a couple of miles from my mom's, and it was on this country road. There's a certain part of that walk where I just get this sensation that I need to walk a lot faster because something is in the woods around the area and it just doesn't want me near there. I really don't know how to explain it, but it's just this feeling like something was really angry that I was there and wanted me gone as quickly as possible. I don't know, maybe it is just my mind playing tricks on me, or maybe there's some kind of ability that I have that I can't quite figure out yet. And well, if anyone has any suggestions to what I saw or have any suggestions about the feelings that I get near a certain area of the woods a few miles up from the road here, then do let me know because I'm just a bit stumped by all of this music. This happened about 10 years ago. I must have been 27 and I'm female, so my partner at the time was in a band and we stayed in this converted garage. Not really converted, I guess it was still very much like a garage. Concrete walls, damp, but we may do. It was in a service lane. It's sort of like a street that has a business down in it and the back of the houses and whatnot. We had come home very early that morning and gone to bed. His bandmate was living in a bus at the time which was parked out the front as they stored the gear next to our flat in another garage. I woke up at around 5 a.m. hearing screams, mainly from a woman but also very aggressive shouting from a man, "I'm going to kill you," and so on. The area that we were in is not the nicest by any means, although now the area is very hot property here. It's not far from the beach, boutique shops, etc., but this was coming from a house that I had thought was condemned. 2 stories, dilapidated, torn curtains, rotten wood, about 5 broken down cars out the front that had been picked apart, and it turns out that someone was living in there. I woke up and went straight to the front door and saw a man stomping around a parked car on the side of the road, chasing a lady in her pajamas around it, threatening to kill her. She was screaming, crying, and out of instinct I screamed out something like, "Hey, what are you doing? I'm calling the cops." They both stopped and looked at me in my pajamas standing near my door barefoot. The man, he had a full leather jacket, pants and boots, half a face tattoo, and even though he was across the street I could see the whites of his eyes. He was obviously on something, and absolutely furious he shouted at me, "I'm going to kill you," in motion cutting of the throat with his thumb. When he turned to me, the woman escaped to the abandoned looking house and locked the door. I, being brave and stupid, replied, "Come on then," and grabbed a large plank of 2x4. I kept it behind the door there as I found this area rather sketchy and would be home alone a lot on the weekends. I've never used it, but I felt better having it there and walked outside in my pajamas and leopard print robe with the W over my shoulder on the phone to the police. Now, I'm not the smallest woman in the world. I must have been around 80 kilos at that point, 510, but he would have taken me out if he wanted. But I think the idea of the police made him second guess. He got the hint and he took off down the road. My partner nor the other bandmate in the bus got up at any point. I must admit that I was pretty angry at both of them. I seemed to be the only anyone who had the kahunas to do anything about it. Another lady across the road came out also, and we talked about our men folk not doing anything about it. Her husband stayed in bed too, and anyway, later on that week a lady came to my house thanking me for helping her niece, that he was some crazy cracked out guy that had fallen in love with her and wouldn't take no for an answer. Apparently he had come to her house without invitation, expecting that she would welcome him drunk and cracked out of his mind with open arms, only to be rejected, which is allegedly what threw him into a rage, to which he proceeded to kick and beat her and chase her around the street. Later on, maybe about a week later, I was told that he was arrested and taken away on my street. He was led away by police, handcuffed with a cigarette